Social and political commentary from a Christian male perspective.
And just like that, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. You saw the thumbnail, you saw the title. So you know what we're about to do. We have a great conversation planned with a guest coming on tonight. We're going to be talking about some hot button topics. We're going to have a good conversation for sure. So I'm looking forward to that. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for jumping into the best live chat on the internet. If you don't mind, do me a quick favor. Go ahead and hit that like button, and that gives you entrance into the best live chat on the internet. Get up in there real quick and tell everybody where you're from. Say hey to everybody. Say what's up. Be kind, all right? And I also want to say thank you to each and every one of the new subscribers. Thank you so much for helping me hit my goal of 50,000 subscribers by the end of April. We are more than on our way, and I want to say I appreciate all of y'all. So thank you so much for that. I also want to say thank you to the now 200 members of the channel. Thank y'all so much. And because we have 200 members of the channel, we now have some new emojis. So you'll see if you have access to it, you'll see down in the chat, you now have some new emojis. So tonight, later on, we're going to be asking some questions. Use your emojis to get our attention. So use your Trump emoji, your Umar Johnson, your Woody emoji, you got the goat emoji. You can use the Ashley Merchant emoji, whatever. Feel free to use that along with the word question to queue up your question so we know where you are, that you have a question. So myself or my guest or both of us can chime in and talk about it. So again, thank y'all so much. Thank you to the 17, 18 of y'all that have already jumped in and hit the like button. I really appreciate it. Now, I know if we're good and well that as much as y'all love me, you probably want to know who in the world are we talking to today? And I'm glad you did. I'm glad you asked. We have the Doghouse Show. Vince from the Doghouse Show. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, man. How about yourself?
No complaints whatsoever, man. None whatsoever. I'm going to have to tell you right now that smooth voice thing that you're doing right there, you're going to have to tamper that down. Only one smooth voice on this show, man, and that's me. You can't be over here using it all smooth voice like that. That's going to probably steer the audience some way, man. We can't be using any kind of underhandedness over here. Anyway, how's it going tonight?
I'll try
How are
to
you?
tone it down. I'm doing good, man. Like it's a sunny day outside. The Lord blessed me by allowing me to wake up another day and live another day and enjoy what he gave us. So, I'm excited about it.
I love it. I love it. All right. Tell us about your show. Tell us who you are, what your channel's about, all that kind of good jazz. Let's go.
Absolutely. So my name is The Doghouse Show. I run a political YouTube channel, Twitch channel, X channel, wherever you want to find me, I am there. I've been doing politics technically since 2019. I've been doing streaming video games and things like that since 2016, 2017. So I'm pretty much, I've been online for quite a bit, but I've been taking it serious for about the past 6 months, probably about since last August or September. So pretty excited about what we're going to get into and talk about. I'm looking forward to having these discussions with you. And if you guys love a liberal point of view, I used to, just a little bit of background about my politics and where I voted. For anybody who's unaware, I voted for Republican actually in 12, 16, and 20. So I voted for Romney, Trump, and then I voted for Cruz in 2018. Then I took the wild step, if you will, and started. I voted for Kamala and Colin Allred. And if anyone didn't get the hint, that means I'm from Texas.
Wild. Well, man, we appreciate you, man. Thank you so very much. The moderators will be dropping your link in the chat. Thank you so much, Miss Mandy. We appreciate you. Got you right there. All right. So we got 2 hot button topics. And since you're the guest, I'm going to let you pick. All right. We got DEI or reparations. All right,
let's go ahead and let's go ahead and I'll do DEI. Let's see what we got in store for us on that one.
All right, let's go. All right. So if you don't mind, tell me why I would want to. We're at a coffee shop. We're sitting down just chilling, talking. Why in the world should I support DEI in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So the interesting thing about DEI for me is that I think that it is pretty, it shouldn't be at the forefront of someone making a particular decision, but I would say that it is at least a bit of a positive in trying to understand everybody's kind of background, I guess, if you will. And I think that there's been a lot of misunderstandings behind DEI and what it actually is. A lot of people say that it's based on, hiring on, particular race or sex or sexual orientation or any of those kinds of natures. But I would say that that's not necessarily what it is. However, you wouldn't find me being a staunch advocate if it were that case. In fact, it would violate civil rights protections. So I would say that if it were that case, then you would still be able to probably hold some kind of a lawsuit or something of that nature. I'm not a lawyer. Can't say you could. It depends on the facts of your case. But I also think that the idea of DEI has been grossly blown out of proportion. I think a majority of people who voted in this election voted based on the economy. They voted based on what their bottom wallet is and whether it is or isn't, whether the economy is good or bad. The reality is that people voted on the economy. DEI was touted in the last administration, but I think it was grossly misrepresented. So,
okay. So give me an idea. I do not support DEI in any of its flavors or shapes. I feel like it violates the idea of impartiality. So I look at you as for example, a widget maker, and because you have a certain skin tone or orientation or gender, I might have to look over you to look to somebody else. Now, on your resume, you might be the best widget maker possible, but because I have too many widget makers in my company, Whitaker's Widget Making, that look like you, then I could not hire you, even though you might be the best for the role and maybe make my company boatloads more money. I could do far more things, but because of the partiality of your external factors, I'm not able to support you.
Right.
Or
so
I'm not able to pick you up. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. So the biggest issue there is the assumption that they are being hired based on a particular characteristic or an immutable characteristic. The reality is that I would think it'd be more akin to saying that there are two equals, however that may be or may not be. And again, I don't really know whether or not the hiring would be chosen one over the other. And even then, to be clear, like a DEI initiative could be something that doesn't even have to take place in the hiring. In fact, if you look at the Civil Rights Act, they don't even allow for hiring based upon any of those characteristics. I would say that, in fact, it prevents the discrimination based upon those. So what I would say is DEI initiatives would be more of things that happen after the hiring process, in which they may support particular causes. They may end up doing particular events, things of that nature. They may, donate to a particular cause. I would argue, and I would agree with you. I wouldn't argue. I would agree with you that if someone is being hired over another person, this is the high idea of merits. If someone is being hired based on an immutable characteristic, I would wholly disagree with that. I think that it should be done in a very meritorious basis. And I don't think that I have seen quite very often where people are being hired based upon one of those immutable characteristics. So that's just,
No problem. Whitaker's Widget Making again. And I announced that the next widget maker that I hire is going to be a black woman. And there's no other reason. It just has to be a black woman. So again, it doesn't matter if she's the best widget maker. It doesn't matter if she's a phenomenal widget maker. What I'm looking for is skin color, is melanin content. Do you feel like that would violate that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're sitting there and you're like, hey, I'm putting race or anything else that's an immutable characteristic before the qualifications, I would say that would not be okay, and in fact would probably violate the Civil Rights Act. Okay. So I would probably be against that. Yeah.
Okay, because that's what Joe Biden did with Ketanji Brown Jackson, is led with the fact that she was going to be a black woman that he's going to hire. He wanted a black woman in the Supreme Court. Not the best Supreme Court justice. And I'm not arguing that she's not a good Supreme Court justice. All I'm saying is that he led with that. And so that was before the hiring process. That was before the search process, actually. So in my mind, I think the idea that we can determine what is the proper diversity of our organization, Whitaker's Widgets, or whatever, I think is problematic for a lot of reasons. And that would probably be one of them right off the bat, is that you're being partial in that. Now, let me be fully transparent. as an alumni of my alma mater, there's been instances where I've gotten benefits and I've gotten opportunities because of where I went to school.
Sure.
We look out for each other. But it wasn't just like, oh, I'm looking for a high chocolate Morehouse man or light or any of that kind of foolishness. But there's still a merit issue there that still needs to play out. But we've helped each other. I mean, but networks work. But this is not a networking thing. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I mean, I don't believe I'd heard anything about Joe Biden. Now, I know that she is obviously the first African-American woman who to sit on the Supreme Court. I think that's a great accomplishment, quite frankly. But I don't know if it was necessarily led by that particular decision. Rather, it was qualifications. I think it is certainly a secondary, thought, if you will. But again, I think when you get in these higher level positions, I would tend to agree that, if he was going after somebody based on the color of their skin, if he was going to get Taji Brown and saying, hey, look, we'll go with this first, all right, cool. I guess the question would be is who else that he could have nominated, I suppose. I mean, I'm not someone, who technically would support. I mean, again, I already said I voted for Trump in 20. I was not a huge Biden supporter, although there was some things that I think were misrepresented by Joe Biden. So,
yeah, no problem. And I appreciate Kevin Briggins throwing this out here. He said it about Kamala as well when she was running for VP. And again, it is prioritizing immutable characteristics, which in my opinion violates, not even my opinion, it violates James. It looks at somebody as their externals and you're elevating them because of their externals rather than acknowledging their abilities and their skills. Because again, he might still have selected her, might still have. But if you lead with and literally say, I'm going to only hire Vince because he checks these boxes, these external characteristic boxes, it doesn't really matter if he's the best widget maker. But because, I'm sorry, I can't select Vince because of his external box checking. I got to select somebody else. That would be problematic. And I feel like we're trying to falsely determine that we as humans can properly determine what diversification means and diversity means, because also very rarely are they talking about diversity of thought. Very rarely are they saying, hey, Jason, we want Jason on the team because he has a different thought process. Most of the thoughts are the same and just the externals are mixed up. But what do you got to say?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to Kamala Harris, I don't think that there was any indication other than the fact that, I mean, certainly it would look as if she was, selected because of the fact that she was African American, but there doesn't seem to be any kind of quote or anything like that from Joe Biden that I'm aware of that would suggest that was the case. I think, I think the closest thing it was that, he said something along the lines that if, your VP or your administration should mimic that of the country. And I think that's a fair representation, but I don't think I've seen anything. I think it's the closest we'd ever gotten really to seeing that Joe Biden selected Kamala Harris because of the fact that she was African American.
I got you.
Yeah.
No problem. No, there's actual quote, and I'm sure it'll pop up in a second, but there's actual quote of him saying that he's going after a African American, as he said, because we can start a whole nother fight. I don't accept that she's African American, but that's a whole other day. We can have that one on another show for sure. But moving into now we got the D into the sentence. Now we got to talk about this equitable outcomes. What are your thoughts on that as it relates to determining outcomes?
Yeah, so equitable outcomes. I mean, again, I don't necessarily think that. I think that some people start in different places in life, and I think that we should try to strive as much as we can to try to, I guess you could say, even the playing field. And what I mean by that is that, and that's such a broad name, right? Equitable. I would say that you could look at things like, for example, if you're in your lower tax bracket, to try to help give them at least a leg up, we should probably have some kind of social welfare programs to try to at least assist in them. I'm someone who believes in means-based testing. Some people on the left don't really believe in that. They should be handed a blank check. That's kind of like UBI. For me, I believe that it should be something that, when we talk about like SNAP benefits or things of that nature, or unemployment benefits, even, for example, those are things that I think are would positively help. And so I think what we should do is just try to assist in that as the best we can. Do I think that means that everybody needs to be a millionaire? No. I think if everybody were a millionaire, then we would end up having record inflation, and then the millionaires would just become the billionaires, and the billionaires would then become the trillionaires. It would just continuously move. If we look at, for example, like minimum wage laws, I think even that you could say we're trying to do, trying to be a little bit of equitable. But I think even then, the problem with that is that you have to do it in a very stepped manner, because if you increase it up to like $15 an hour overnight, you're gonna have the same issue I just talked about, right? You're gonna have rapid inflation. So one of the things I look at is again, equitable can just simply mean trying to help those who do not have as much opportunity, to try to provide them as best of an opportunity as they can. And that can apply even all the way up to really middle class. I think the middle class is often forgotten about. I think there's those kinds of means testing where, like myself, I fit into probably about that kind of upper middle class where, we're still struggling, right? We still have inflation, but the government has set a bar of up to $60,000. The interesting thing is that I qualify for Obamacare, but I don't qualify in my state, because my state I don't qualify in my state for SNAP benefits, because my state for our kids size and everything else is like, I think 60,000 or something like that. So, again, is that equitable? I don't know. So anyways, yeah.
Okay. No, I appreciate it. I think Kevin probably just shouted it out as well. DEI didn't start with a look at where you are, let's try to bring you up to where you should be or where we think you could be. And is more of, we've determined that because of a certain ethnicity or because of certain characteristics, then you need to be here. And I think that's a little bit more problematic than just saying, everybody who is in a certain socioeconomic, we need to help raise them up. But even more than that, I find it problematic or questionable that we believe that we have the right, we have the right, mindset, if you will, for how somebody should move up, rather than that person moving up on his or her own steam. I know a lot of people don't like that. I'm not going to use the pulling themselves up by their own bootstrap, because I don't think that's probably the right way. But at the end of the day, we're not doing much to help them move up appropriately. And I think the E in DEI, in my opinion, is super problematic, because it does kind of start with, it comes with some preconceives that we know exactly where you should be, and we're going to move you there. What do you think about that?
I mean, again, I think at the end of the day, the question I guess you'd have to ask is whether we should have something where the question has to be asked. Do we provide government benefits to those who, by no fault of their own, for example, unemployment benefits, right? Mm-hmm. And those are going to be varying state to state. They can't help it when their company does layoffs. I mean, unless you want to put government regulations. In some states, they even have like union where you can't be fired at will. And Texas is an at-will state, so they don't have to give a reason or anything. You can just be fired at any moment. Gotcha. Do we provide unemployment benefits to them because that was no fault of their own? Or do we sit there and say, well, you're fired. You should have been prepared for a second job. I think there has to be a certain level there. And this is where I think it differs on the left, because I think the left has such a diverse school of thought. I think that the left, you have, liberals, progressives, socialists, Marxists, and communists, right? We have all sorts, and each one of those is going to have a different varying level to which they want government intervention, all the way up to fully government controlled everything, right? For me as a liberal, I believe in the fact that we should have some government assistance programs, but I think the part of me being a liberal is that I also believe that there is some element to it that you should be able to try to, fend for yourself essentially. I do think I think hard work and ethic and your upbringing can certainly be that driving factor you need. But I also understand that there is just some times where you, at no fault of your own, are in the position that you're in. Maybe you were born in that scenario, right? Or is it the kid's fault that they were born into poverty? No, it's the parents' fault. But at the same time, do we just say, well, the kids can't do anything. Kids can't go out and get a job. Do we just say, hey, kids, we're not going to provide you SNAP benefits because your mother's, this case or whatever, right? I think there has to be a certain level.
No, and I think we agree to that. The issue that I have with it is there's an idea that we know what is the right For example, if I'm able-bodied man but I don't work, and I'm not going out there and applying myself at all, trying at all whatsoever, then do I need to be at the same level as you? Do I need to be brought up to the same level who's an active? Let's just say we're the same age. I don't think we are, but let's just say we're the same age. And you are out there crushing it every day. Do I need to be have the same outcomes as you? Well, no, because I'm not actually applying myself. Now, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be some forms of welfare, some forms of assistance. I think the problem is that we can get into a longer discussion is that the longevity of them. There's not really like a sunset for these. They're just going to be forever. That's why we have multiple generations who've been on welfare and there's no end in sight. So I don't know if that's a good idea. And let's also keep in mind that we're kind of negating the sovereignty of God, that God has put this person in this position. And one of the things that, for example, my problem that we have with some of these movements and programs that have come up over the last 60 years or so is it removes the opportunity for the church and Christians to provide help and assistance. So, for example, SNAP. Now, of course, now it probably seems like it just seems like a crazy idea, but where is the church's ability to be able to help in this situation? Because nothing. They don't have to, because the Gold Dome downtown is always going to be doing it, or the Gold Dome, the Capitol is going to keep providing for them. It doesn't provide any opportunity for me as a churchgoer, as a parishioner, to be in assistance. My church actually supports a public elementary school, and we have a food pantry in the public elementary school. So 3-4 times a year, we fill it up for these families and these parents and such of that nature. And the other times a year, other churches do as well. So this is an opportunity that we have to be a support to them. I don't know if they get public aid. I don't know if they're getting the various and sundry welfare opportunities, but it will never be said, and doesn't have to be said, that they didn't have an opportunity if the government decided they weren't going to do it. Because this school does have a very robust food pantry that we stock, again, 4 times a year. So all the way around the block. And because of that, we've now lost the opportunity to do those kind of things on a grand scale, whether it be helping inside your church with your parishioners or outside your church in the community, because because we in our wisdom have determined that this is what you need. This is what you need. I think that's where the problem for me starts and ends.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we should definitely prop up our nonprofits. I think that would be great. I have no problem with that whatsoever. I think, in fact, we could have them partner with, like, for example, here in Texas, the Texas Workforce Commission, and I believe they may even do that. There should be some kind of a directory where, if you do applying for these benefits, that they hand you a pamphlet that says, "Hey, here's all the lists of your nonprofits, regardless of
Right.
religion or any kind of thing like that." And I think if you were to only provide, in which we've seen some states kind of teeter on that line, if they were to do just one state, or one religion, you'd probably have a whole lot of issues. Although Republican states are probably going to be more likely to do something like that than non-Republican states. But that's neither here nor there. The point of what I'm trying to get at is I think that, to your earlier point about equity, it's not really necessarily equal outcomes as much as it is equal opportunities, right? And to what that extent means is essentially, look, if you were not all the time is this the case, but if you were born into a wealthy family, chances are you're probably going to have a decent outcome. Now, if you were someone who was born into an impoverished family, your outcomes are going to be a little bit different. Maybe you're in a inner city, maybe you're in maybe even an urban area, but you're not going to have that kind of same education, right? That's going to be the issue. And so it's really about those, and there's different kinds of programs that you can look into that. But I definitely agree with you. I think nonprofits absolutely should be funded. I think nonprofits should be lifted up. I'm a big, not free market guy, but definitely want to try to help prop those places up. So
I got you. And I just want to make sure I'm being clear. I don't believe that. I'm not just saying, like, I don't want government to fund church activities or to such like that. I want government to leave churches alone, let them do those things. And if that means that near, with a 3-mile radius of where I worship, then that area should be properly taken care of by Smyrna Press, by Smyrna Methodist, by Smyrna First Baptist, or whatever it is. They are making sure those people in that immediate area, and people come from the city of Atlanta, several miles away from my church, to come and ask for assistance from my church. So I've seen this. I've been a part of it. I've been on the deciding committee and such of that nature. So I don't want the government involved in it at all. I really would like to see the government out of that place and not try to pick winners and losers, but allow the as you said, free market, or let's just say a market in general, to egg on innovation, to egg on cooperation, because then that might mean that me and Vince's family need to work together to help Johnny, who just lost his job down the street. Good guy, just lost his job. Hey, let's see if we can help him out. You help them find a job, and my family will make sure they get food every week until things are made right. But again, there's an opportunity that we miss because the government is doing everything. So now I don't have to worry about it. They can go get SNAP. I don't have to worry about my neighbor because the government is going to do X, Y, Z, A, B, C. And that's where I'm feeling kind of landing with that.
Yeah, and I think the biggest issue though too is like, I get it. Again, if churches fail, they fail, and again, nothing necessarily inherently wrong. I mean, if the parishioners don't, tithe, and they don't really want to contribute to the church would end up failing. They do have some benefits like tax exemptions and things of that nature as well. Yeah. But I think even outside of the church, I mean, any various nonprofits that are out there that are helping, whether it be the homeless, whether it be, maybe felons that are getting out of prison. These people, now granted, I think felons are an interesting topic, but for a whole nother day.
We can, yeah.
That's a whole nother topic for another day. But there's those nonprofits, and I think that there's nothing. To me, I just don't inherently see the issue with governments, especially when it benefits the betterment of society, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. I mean, I would agree with you to the extent that there should be certain limitations here, right? I mean, obviously, would you want someone who's making $200,000 a year or even $100,000 a year, quite frankly, on government benefits and receiving the same amount of benefits as someone who's making $10,000 a year?
Absolutely
no. Right.
But I would argue that it's very possible that the system needs to be removed because, there's tons of programs we could sit here and go through and do our mini Doge course here, chopping away at programs, but there's many programs. Why does anybody need this program? Like not just the $100,000, but why does the $10,000 a year person need this program? But even worse than that, if we had a system that would allow for again, I'm a fair tax supporter. So if we had a fair tax situation where I, as a person that makes $100,000, because I'm consuming more, I'm paying more in taxes. You as a person that doesn't make $100,000 a year, because you're not consuming as much, you don't pay as much in taxes. That would be a fair situation. I feel like that would benefit everybody far more, but I digress there. And now inclusion. So we talked about diversity, we talked about equity. Now let's talk about inclusion. I feel and I'll jump in. I'll just start. I feel problematic because most of the things that they're talking about including are things that contradict what I understand about the scriptures, and some very in your face, thumb in your eye scenarios that we're not just talking about. Let's just include. Everybody here on my channel knows my mother is a polio survivor, so she's probably in a very small group of people who isn't in an iron lung. She is ambulatory. She can go wherever. I saw her at church yesterday, and my mom's all over the place, and she's a polio survivor. Now, that being the case, however, we're not talking about just hiring polio survivors and such of that nature. We're talking about people. Usually, what they're talking about are people that have a lifestyle that contradicts what scripture teaches pretty plainly and pretty clearly. So that is the inclusion. It's not just, hey, we got to have a handicapped person. Again, going back to that box checking situation, but the best widget maker happens to be handicapped. But even more than that, they have to have a lifestyle choice that we think needs to be elevated and quote unquote represented. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, inclusion can mean a whole lot of things.
Mhm.
I'm by no means a DEI expert. My main focus is on a lot of bigger things, but I was saying in terms of inclusion, again, I think you can. It's a very broad word that can mean a whole lot of things.
Mhm.
And I think again, someone who um, believes in scripture, I totally sympathize and understand with what you're saying. I guess it depends on how far you take that. Because, for example, do we? And I don't know if you want to get into this because it's not something again that you'll find that I'm necessarily in support of. But for example, some people may mention about men and women's sports. That's just kind of the big topic of an inclusion, right?
Right.
And so for what you'll find is on the left, surprisingly, in just the past 6 years that I've been doing politics, more times than not, you'll find that most people will agree that that is probably not something that ought to happen just because of that.
Mhm.
And this is coming from the left that I haven't seen this. There is more, and there's been a little bit of a pushback on that. Now, in terms of like the more controversial topics, I try to usually stay away from them.
No, but we can stay with
Yeah.
men and women's sports.
Yeah.
I mean, because there are definitely some real spicy topics as well. But I mean, a
Right.
man pretending. I have 2 daughters,
Right.
and thankfully they didn't play any contact sports and such of that nature. But there would be a problem if they were in a contact sport with a boy. I mean, that's just and it.
Absolutely.
We seem to have embraced and normalized ignoring objective reality that I don't know you from a can of paint, Vince, but I'm pretty certain you would probably outrun my daughter. You'd probably outrun my mom, outrun my wife without any problem. Probably not even warming up. It's like we're just ignoring reality. Like there is a bona fide, real, biological difference between Vince and the lady at the grocery store. There's a real difference between dear Will Christian and my next door neighbor Kirsten. It's like we need to bring back normalizing some real now again, if we're just talking about including people again with a physical disability or something of that nature, we can probably have that discussion. That's not what we've been talking about though. We're
Right.
talking about some real bona fide nuts and bolts. Like, wait, hold on, what? That doesn't make sense. And so I feel like we've thrown our minds out of the window in order to do something that makes no sense. That we really truly, when the brass tacks, we realize that there is a problem with this, and I'm wondering why we can't. And there seems to be one side of the equation that seems to be far more willing to just completely pretend like they don't see it and whistle past the graveyard than the other. But what do you say?
Yeah. I mean, I think I mean, I'll say this. It may seem like a big deal because let me put it like this. We've seen a lot of, just work with me for a little bit on this. When it comes to the planes, when we've seen like the plane issue that we saw, or better yet, let's do the train thing. The train, there was a train derailment. I believe it was last year or the year before. And after that incident, there was a hyper fixation on all the different train derailments. Like you would saw, like, I swear there was like 5 or 6 train derailments within the next 2 weeks.
Mhm.
And then what you find is that it's actually pretty common. But the opposite is true here. And what I mean by, well, not the opposite, but what I mean by that is that with this one, what we're seeing is it's a very, very rare instance in which these things occur. And yet they have received the biggest spotlight, and understandably so, rightfully so. I get it. Right. Is the idea that there is a biological male, participating in female sports.
Mhm.
And again, you would find most of the people I've talked to on the left, short of, I probably would say, a niche small group of progressives and maybe even socialists, and go further left than that, most would say, yeah, like, hey, look, I would agree, like, just keep them into 2 different sports and everything else. And I think that that's such a controversial topic. I would agree with you. I think there's certain biological differences between me and a woman. So but again, this is one of the things that I usually try to steer kind of away from, just because, again, I have not done near enough research as I probably ought to have on
Okay.
this. And one of my biggest things about when I talk about these topics is I try to make sure that I've gotten a little bit of an in-depth knowledge on this. But I
Gotcha.
think it's just really a niche issue that's been honestly blown way out of proportion than it really needed to be. Does it need to be addressed? I guess. Is it something that's a national crisis. I don't think it is.
I'll
But
give you a national
yeah.
crisis. I'll give you it's not a national crisis, but like let's just walk back in time about 10 years ago. About 10 years ago, it was just we just want to be able to get married. And now we're in this place where if you don't affirm that I want to Frankenstein little Johnny or Frankenstein little Sally, then you don't deserve to have a job. You can't participate in commerce or be in a free market. So we've moved pretty quickly. So I don't know if we can be as naive and say, hey, you know what, this is not really that big a deal, because I can clearly see women's sports going away, and again, I think since 2020, we now can conclude that all conspiracy theories just need a little bit more time. And I can see them going away. If you had all men participating in women's sports or opened it up like that, because you don't see women participate in men's sports. So you can clearly see that there's a difference. If there were no differences, then women would be in the NFL, women would be in the NBA, women would be in Major League Baseball and just crushing it. But you don't. You see men doing it. So it's one-sided side of the table. So I think we should be, again, I don't know if it's national, as bad as, emergency hair on fire, but I do think we should probably give it a lot more attention than we're giving it. Just my little 2 cents there.
I mean, I get what you're trying to say, which is that, like, look, to ignore it just advances it, and I completely understand that. And I think for me, we have seen the progression of this in a different way. And again, on the left, you'll see all I can keep saying is that there is a diversity of thought, because a lot of people would agree. And I would think because I know quite a few people that are also in that community that would pretty much disagree that of like what you were saying with little Johnny and little Sally. Most would agree. I would agree. And the fact that anybody would agree to that, I would probably say is probably not correct. But I think, again, even with that topic, I think it is such a niche issue that we should still address it. Absolutely. Like, if it's happening, it needs to be addressed. But at the same time, is it as big as it has been blown up to be? I think so. I think what we've seen is DEI been kind of used as this pathway to make something that is really such a niche issue and a much larger issue than it really is. I've seen many topics being brought up about DEI and and to go back to my original point, why that is that Donald Trump won the election. And there's nothing to suggest that is the case. In fact, DEI is so niche, it wasn't even in the top 4 or 5. So I just think, again, I agree with you. I think me and you are going to agree more than we disagree. But yeah, I just think that it's just not like as national of an issue. It should be handled by all means.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't know if I would necessarily like say that it's this big thing.
I got you. I do see it as being more of again, I don't think we should say, oh, well, it's not as big a deal. It would be kind of like how much of if you stubbed your toe, would you say, oh, okay, well, it's not really that bad because it's just throbbing. It's not really that bad because it's slightly discolored. Okay, that toe's pointing north and it used to be going the other direction. It's not really that bad. Now it's swollen up as big as my big toe. At some point, you're going to say, hey, I need to go to the doctor. And I think though it might be a small thing, sure, I don't think that we have the luxury of saying that it's an insignificant thing. Because again, keep in mind, some of these things are propelled by ideologies that is not just saying, hey, we just want everybody to, elderly people and young people to be able to have opportunities. No, these are ideas that now promote things like, again, a man can get pregnant. We don't know what a woman is. These kind of things like that I think are significantly more problematic than just something that, hey, we agree to disagree, or we don't understand. I think they're super problematic as time goes on, because we've seen it played out. Again, like little Johnny, if you don't allow me to Frankenstein little Johnny or little Sally, then you're a bigot and you don't deserve to be a part of the marketplace. That's how how did we get there? I mean, we got there through an idea and people's ideas that were not challenged and allowed to fester and were allowed to metastasize, and now they're here because we kept capitulating. But that's my 2 cents. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see it a lot from the left. That's something that they're openly advocating for, and if there's anything, what I have seen advocated for, you know, when it comes to that, it's been, if anything, like gender affirming care. And even then, that doesn't necessarily mean, that particular issue. Now, there is, I agree, when it comes to children, I'm pretty sensitive to that topic, because I'm like, hey, look, leave the children out of it. I think that's completely fair. Like, leave the children out of it. But I also understand too, like, it's such a sensitive topic to talk about all of this. And when it comes to, like, men getting pregnant, well, then that's outside of little Johnny and little Sally. At that point now, it's a grown adult, and a grown adult. Now, should it be accepted by science? That's a whole nother conversation, right?
So I agree with that.
I mean, at the end of the day, if, little Sally becomes, as an adult,
little Johnny,
right. Becomes, well, I was gonna say, like, if the little Sally grows up and decides to be, Johnny, well, in that case, now the gender, I'm trying, because I'm not well versed in a whole lot of these whole, like, gender ideology things, but when it comes to, like, gender, there's a difference between sex and gender, where gender can be a little more fluid. Then technically, in that regard, and I'm saying this only in a technical sense, could a man become pregnant? Yes. Now, does it mean that a biological male can become pregnant? Obviously not, right? There's just the anatomy's not there. Now, if they're trying, and this is where, again, if you're trying to go down this route of, like, trying to make it a scientific fact, there's a whole lot of layers here, which makes it so complicated to talk about.
Okay, no problem. Do you believe that we as humans are able to and should change or augment what God has done? Example being, if it were impossible for us to change the sky from blue to another color, would you think that was something that humans should do? Like, we can change the sky from blue to, now we decided that we want it to be purple. Would you think that's something we should do?
I mean, again, I think that, to your earlier point, you mentioned that God has us go through things for a reason. Mm-hmm. Now, I believe that there is a reason that this person is going through this particular thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that even an intervention, I think, for my ideology, I look at it as, you're going through this particular situation in your life for a reason.
For sure.
Maybe it is. Now, I agree with you. We can talk about biblical, the Bible and all the things about that. But I think the issue here is could they also be going through that particular transformative phase because it's going to teach them a lesson? Maybe they go through that phase because it makes them happier. It may not. And we've seen many instances where, something is maybe not in the most idealist sense, right? But for example, I've lost many relatives, and that's part. And what I've seen, I'll give you an example. Last year, my wife's grandmother passed away, and instead of sitting there going, "Man, this is a tragedy," like, she passed away because of cancer, which was tragic. Did I sit there and blame the cigarettes that she was smoking or anything? No, I sat there and said, "Hey, look, at the end of the day, we're going through this for a reason." And sure enough, I ended up going to church right after that, because she told me on her in the hospital bed, she said, "Hey, look, take these kids to church." And I did. And so I think in the same light here, when we talk about, this particular topic, I think that you could also apply and say that maybe God is having them go through this for a particular reason. Maybe it is for them to, be happier, and maybe it's because eventually they're going to see the light, whatever you may see. I think you could also apply it in that manner as well, and saying there is a reason. Do we always know the reason in the moment? No, typically, and yeah,
no, I can understand that. And the passing of a grandparent, death is sadly the most. We call it a natural occurrence, but according to scripture, it's actually an unnatural. We weren't supposed to die, but we've accepted that. But this is an actual rebellion against God's design. So again, me shaking my fist at the blue sky saying I want it to be purple. I want to change something And please understand, my happiness, you see no scripture that tells you that thou shalt be happy. So there isn't a goal. So my happiness isn't the goal of creation. My happiness isn't the goal of what God wants for me. And I feel very comfortable that that's a reality. Now, what we're talking about here is truly me shaking my fist and saying, God, I want to be somebody that you did not make me to be. Now, just because I feel this way in my mind or have this thought in my head, that does not change the fact reality. I mean, if you've been married for 8 seconds, you probably had a thought in your head that probably goes against what you said when you was giving those vows. So we don't act upon those. We submit those and say, God, these are some horrible thoughts. Give them to Christ. Just get them. Deal with this. Deal with me. Confess them to your accountability partner. Ask your pastor praying for you, so on and so forth. But we don't act upon them, because following this case, then I would be happier doing fill in the blanks. And so I don't believe that changing one's gender, and I don't believe that gender and sex are different. I think they are the exact same things. And they are out there, just different definitions or different expressions of the, for lack of a better term, the plumbing that God gave us. So you can say gender, one could say sex, but they're the same thing. And the idea that I can change my gender, change my sex, is super problematic, because again, it seems to be a form of rebellion that I don't want what you've given me. I'm not happy, content, or satisfied with who God has made me to be. I'm shaking my fist at God, and I'm going to do better because I know what's good for me. Well, more than you. Go ahead.
Yeah, let me ask you this. So when it comes to, when we talk about, sin, let's just call it what it is, right? Because that's where we're going, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do we agree, though, that sometimes God puts us through trials and tribulations for a particular reason? So, for example, like if we have somebody who was to go through a particular, they're going through a particular drug episode. Maybe they're, wrapped up in that. Maybe they are caught up in crime. These are things that are inherently against God's will.
Absolutely.
But God is putting them through that trial and tribulation for a particular reason, right? Maybe they come out of prison and then all of a sudden they're reformed. They said, hey, I'm not doing that again. No way, Jose, I'm out of here. And so what I'm getting at that is that couldn't you also say that them particularly going through this particular phase is also maybe a part of God's storyline, either for this person, maybe for the greater, humanity, maybe just maybe, in the view of what, in your worldview, maybe what's going on is that by having all of this happening, maybe it's going to bring to an enlightenment. I mean, the idea is that what I'm trying to get at is that we ultimately do not know, and even sometimes we'll never know what God's will is.
Yep.
And so when we go through and see this person, it's not my place personally to tell that person. Now, I will sit there and I will look at them and go, hey, look, here's God's word. I'll tell them about it. I believe in kind of a crowbar versus sledgehammer approach. I don't think it's my place to really tell them, necessarily how they should live, I guess, if you want to put it that way.
Okay.
To me, I think for me, it's more of, look, I'm going to be their friend. I'm going to say, hey, look, how can I help you? Are you struggling? What are things like that? Just like if I saw somebody that was, going through that addiction, saying, hey, look, I'm here for you. When you're ready to, turn your ways, I'm here for you. Not sit there and say, you're an addict. I'm not going to talk to you. Goodbye.
Gotcha.
And then hang up the phone. You know what I mean? Yeah.
No, I don't think, and that's definitely unequivocally not. I have several friends who have had bouts of marital infidelity. And many of them, sadly, have not been able to right the ship, and their relationships failed. They're divorcees now. And I've told them, you're a bonehead for what you did. You do realize that, but you can still call me. We can still talk. I'm not going to disown you by any means or measure, because I would want that same amount of grace if I ever acted a fool. Okay. And my wife knows that she can call these gentlemen, some of them that are no longer in it, and say, Jason's acting crazy, and there'll be a knock at the door. So that's not the case at all. What I am saying, however, is this. If I came to one of them and said, hey man, Lady Dear Woker, she ain't behaving. She ain't doing what she's supposed to be doing. You know, this, this little honey thing over here, she says she'll do all the things right. I'm gonna probably be missing a tooth. I'm gonna probably be in some trouble. There'll be some pastors that'll be called. The head of my diaconate will be calling me. There'll be some problems well before I go get to do the deed that I was talking about. So we're not saying that if you're dealing with and struggling with something, then there is grace. But we're talking about people who've already gone ahead and castrated themselves. We got people who are stitching up holes that shouldn't have been stitched up and putting balloons in places that shouldn't have been there. Those are problems. And you've now gone too far. Now we can still be gracious to you and call you to repentance, but those people should be called to repent before they've gotten that far down the rabbit hole. Because at this point, like and we're talking about adults, but we started out earlier. They were talking about children. Like that's inappropriate. That's wrong. That's super wrong. That's millstone level wrong. Millstones are us, for real. So that's the problem. I'm not saying that one cannot have a bout or some kind of issue, but the problem is that the acting upon it has taken it to a new level rather than just a thought that's in your mind, which is sinful, by the way. But now I've taken it to another place of acting upon it, slicing and stitching and doing all that stuff to it. And now we're well past that point. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I guess my question is, because there's a lot to peel back on this. So I guess my question is, there's a lot here. So when it comes to the castrating themselves and things of that nature, would we also say the same about, say, bodily piercings or tattoos, for example, that leave scars? And when it comes to castrating themselves, I think the bigger question is if the idea is that God said, be fruitful and multiply. I'm not sure if that's where we're going with that.
It wasn't it, but I'm with you. Go ahead.
Okay. Then the idea is like, well, then a hypothetical scenario would be, what if they have already had kids and then they decided afterwards, like, hey, good question. Actually, a good point is even outside of just the idea of castrating. What about, you're like, hey, I don't want to have any more, kids, and a woman gets her tubes tied, or a man goes ahead and gets their tubes tied. We have to think about it in that regard as well. At what point are we really violating God's will, I guess, is the question.
And I think we could have, and if we wanted to, we could put on a spectrum. I think somebody getting a vasectomy, somebody getting their tubes tied is demonstratively different than somebody slicing off, stitching up, and doing that nature. I think we're almost in two different galaxies. Now, if you want to get into we can have the discussion about whether a vasectomy and such like that is God's will. I think we can have that discussion. I think that's intra play. We can have that conversation. However, when we're talking about the situation here where Jim Bob wants to become Sally Jane, there is a problem that's far more than just I don't want to have any more kids. I got 8 kids already. I'm good. She's fertile Myrtle, so I'm gonna go ahead and get a vasectomy. To me, I think those are not on the same plane. But I mean, we can put them on a spectrum, but just realize one, you're gonna need a telescope to be able to see it because we're so far away from that end. But and again, we're not talking about inclusion, in the DEI spectrum. We're not talking about inclusion men that have had vasectomies or women that have the tubes tied. They're talking about men who think they're women and women who think they're men. And that's a whole different game when it comes to that, in my opinion. But what do you think?
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, and this is where things are going to, I like to keep it a little bit, we're going to get a little, maybe possibly a little contentious here. What I guess is I want to try to get to the root of the problem. Mm-hmm. So you said that there is an inherent problem with that. Can you elaborate on that? I'm just trying to understand a little bit more about your thought process and your background on that, like where the problem lies. Because like I mentioned earlier, you said, well, these are on two different spectrums and there's an inherent problem with one, but not the other. But if the idea is that this is the will of God, that, we be fruitful and multiply, well, then it seems like whether your tubes are tied or you slice and dice, so to speak, it would seem like either both of them, the outcome is that you're not going to be able to be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah.
So if that outcome is the same, then where is the inherent problem with one versus the other?
No, that's a great question. I'm going to go with, if like, for example, I could still be fruitful and multiply. I could still not have a vasectomy. My wife can still not have her tubes tied, and we can just, play the, make sure we're doing the body rhythm calendar, and we still not have any more kids. And guess what? I'm not rebelling against God wholeheartedly. I mean, in a grand scale of turning myself into my wife and she turned herself into me. So there's a big difference. Again, if we say, hey, we got 6 kids, God has blessed us, but really, I don't think we need to have a 7th. All right, so we're gonna do the rhythm. We got the Rhythm Nation thing going. Okay, got you. Or I'm gonna go get my tubes, get my snip. She's gonna go get her tubes tied. Now we know we ain't gonna, no way possible gonna have any kids. Okay, great. I'm sorry. I don't think that we'd have to. I don't think you'd have to be brought up on church discipline about the fact that you had a vasectomy and your wife had her tubes tied. You becoming your wife and your husband becoming you, and your wife becoming you, that's a whole nother game. That's we're not just talking about a simple procedure that doesn't demonstrably change who you are, but we're talking about changing exactly who you are. And the reason I say I feel like it's a big problem is because I believe it's a 10th commandment issue. And the 10th commandment, we know that, is talking about coveting your neighbor's stuff. And I feel like that's a form of covetousness. Like, I covet being a woman. She covets being a man. And all Hades is broken loose from there. Rather than saying, hey, you know what, this thought, I need to take this to the foot of the cross and repent. But no, we've now unleashed insanity. And now we can't, again, tell you what a woman is and don't know what a man is. So I do think it's a little bit more than just, they're not the same. But
yeah, I was going to say, I think for me, when it comes to that, the issue is what inherently, so there's actually a couple of things I want to say. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to, by slicing and dicing, you're no longer who you are. I guess the question becomes, what in that process no longer makes you who you are, because that particular region is no longer functional. And I'm trying not to be too graphic here, by the way. I'm just trying to understand this, because then the coveting thing, well, then if coveting is the issue, then there's multiple things we can talk about that are covetous, right? Yeah. We can talk about like money, whether it be the car or whatever. We can covet a whole lot of things. It could be coveting another person's wife. Again, it seems like, again, you're saying that coveting is an issue, but it seems like there's multiple issues within that 10th commandment that really kind of doesn't necessarily make that particular issue unique. So that's what I'm trying to see is, like, in other words, to covet is to covet, whether you're coveting a car, whether you're coveting, money, whether you're coveting that you want to be a woman, whatever it may be, it's still coveting. It's the same, like I was saying earlier about, be fruitful and multiply, whether you get your tubes tied or something's dismembered, right? Like a better word, then you're still unable to multiply. So I guess the issue is like, and even then, just because you get your tubes tied doesn't make you no longer a woman, nor does
there
a
you
biological
go.
woman.
That's
and so
it.
No, I know. So hold on, the biological woman, and nor does removing your area down there change the fact that you're a biological male. However, though, I guess my issue is I guess how does that inherently mean that? So let me ask you this: if I were to go in and I were to get a vasectomy, does that no longer make me like? So I guess what I'm trying to understand here is, what is it that makes this inherently a problem? Even by saying coveting, then we can say it's a problem, but I don't see how it's more of a problem than, say, the other. I think is what I'm trying to get at. It doesn't make sense, because it doesn't seem like one is more of a problem than the other. If by that logic is like, the problem is that it's coveting, or the problem is that we're not being fruitful and multiplying. Okay. And if we're saying, well, because you dismember, you're no longer how God made you in his image, well, then we'd have to say that problem can apply to vasectomies or tube ties or tattoos, because God didn't make you born with tattoos. God didn't make you born with piercings. Yeah.
Okay. So let's stick with vasectomies and tubes tied. And if you've been looking at the chat, there's been tons of people discussing this. And I don't know if anybody knows this. I got a vasectomy after Chief Executive Second Born was born. So we only have 2 kids. and we can only have 2 kids. That's it. So that is a conclusion of the Whitaker story over the Dear Woke story over here at Whitaker Park. Now, I don't believe that. I don't think that there's any issue problem. I will stand before Christ 100% fine in the decision to have no other children. If I decided that I wanted to be my wife, I feel like there's no way in the world I could stand before Christ with, a top situation, lower region has been sliced and diced and Frankenstein. I couldn't do that because that's not who he made me to be. Because also, please keep in mind, there are tons of reasons why a woman might get her tubes tied. There's actually reasons why a man would get a vasectomy. So those are actually there could be medical reasons that would do it. There's not one medical reason you can tell me about turning your Johnson into something else or stitching up a hole that shouldn't have been stitched up. There's not a medical reason even for it. So I can make the medical argument for a vasectomy and tubes tied. You cannot make a medical argument for sex change. You just can't do that. But go ahead.
Yeah, no. So I think the question is though, is like you were saying, I can't stand before God having, top surgery and bottom surgery. Because again, and I'm going to go right back to the beginning, which is then would that not be the same then, even if there is a potential medical reason to have a vasectomy, and even if there wasn't, even if I were to grant to you that there's no reason to have a bottom surgery other than just for looks, whatever that may be, there's still the thing about vasectomies that is majority elective. That's something that you can do. And a woman getting her tubes tied, there are certain circumstances where you may have a cyst, an ovarian cyst, and you may have to get your tubes tied in some cases. I don't know if that'd be the case, but you get what I'm saying.
We're men. They'll give us grace.
Yeah. More time. Yeah. We're men. There you go. Right. So the more times than not, it is more of an elective than it is like, man, it's like required. So I guess my question is that still goes right back to the point of the tattoos and the piercings, right? Because those tattoos and the piercings are fundamentally changing. And then how far do we want to take that? Do we want to say, well, shaving our hair because, we came out without hair. So we can't have hair.
Well, then I'm in line. I'm in compliance then, brother. I'm in compliance then. I like
that.
There you go.
Hey, some people have made fun of my forehead, so I get called that I'm balding too.
Go and embrace it, man. Go and embrace it, then you're done. Then you're done. So I totally understand. And like I said, I'm willing to put it on the spectrum and willing to put vasectomies and tube tied on one end of the spectrum. But again, changing your gender or stitching and Frankensteining your body, that's still going to be on the spectrum. The spectrum just might happen to have been all the way in another solar system. But I'm going to give you that they're on the same line. They're just really far away from one another. And I don't think that if one got a tattoo, one got a piercing, shaved your hair, I don't think that those, again, I'll put them on the spectrum with you. It's just they're not going to be on the same plane as slicing and dicing and stitching something that should not have been sliced and diced and stitched. I just don't know if we can make that jump without really doing violence to the scriptures, really doing violence to, well, you have done violence to yourself, but that would be it. So I don't think if we can do that honestly, Okay, real quick. This might be a good question so we can, because we are going to transition over to reparations.
Of course, yeah.
All right. Question. If you are a man and you want to be a woman, who are you attracted to? Are you already attracted to men before going all that way? Okay. You want to jump on this?
Yeah, I could try to jump on this. So if you're a man, you want to be a woman, who are you attracted to? So this is kind of easy, but also complicated at the same time. You can have it both ways. You could be attracted to men before transitioning. You could be attracted to women after transitioning. It sounds crazy, but I've seen it. It just really depends on the person. I guess you can be attracted to anybody you want to be attracted to, I guess. Well, please, within the confines of the law, please, because that's pretty gross.
Yeah. Got you. So I would say here that this person's mindset is sinful to start with. If I wanted to be a woman, why do I want to be a woman? Because I think I'm attracted. Again, it's just super complicated and super weird because I've never even remotely thought about that. So therefore, I'm going to say that those are some thoughts and some ideas that need to get that need to be pushed up against. They need to be dealt with, because I don't believe that you can do that and say, "Oh no, I'm perfectly straight. I just want to be a chick." I don't think that's possible. Or I'm perfectly straight. I want to be a man. I don't believe you can do that. So, therefore, there's going to be some problems that need to be dealt with at the cross, and that would be probably where I would land that boat. But no, that was good, man. Thank you. All right, Mr. Dog Show. That was good, man.
It was a good conversation back and forth. Like I said, I mean, for me, I think when it comes to DEI, I think it's just not a big deal. And for me, it's something that I think is not something I'm super like well versed in, for the simple fact that it isn't something that I think is all of that much of a big deal. I usually also try to leave that to people who are within that community themselves, because they would also simply just know a whole lot more about this topic than simply I would. That's why I was trying to work within your framework more than it is to really kind of like rest my laurels on like some kind of study that somebody could bring up. It's just not, I just don't have that. You know what I mean? So
no, I totally get you. That's fair. That's fair. Let me just say real quick. There was a couple of comments that the producer tagged real quick. DEI is prioritizing immutable characteristics. I mean, I can rock with that. True crime was in my mind. Kamala Harris is not a black woman, but I'm here to pick fights with that one. I'm here to pick a fight for sure. What does Kevin say? It's not about how much it happens. It's about the ideology driving it. Men and women's sports goes along with the idea that men can get pregnant. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. Appreciate you, brother. And then we just read Katie's. I appreciate y'all. Thank you so much for those excellent questions or comments. I do want to say, if you do have a question and you are a member of the channel, feel free to use your emoji powers, and we'll add them to the stream as well. All right. Vince, you ready to write me that reparations check? Get that checkbook out, man. Get it going. Let's go.
You're gonna find. Look.
Run me that check, man. Come on.
I think. When it comes to reparations, man. I mean, here's the thing. These ideologies are kind of, again, in the left. There's a spectrum. We talk about the spectrum when it comes to sinning. It's the same thing with this ideology. You're gonna find people more on the progressive side of things than the liberal side of things that will say, "Hey, write a blank check." Not super in favor of that. I understand that there's certainly there was a systemic issue that took place in the 1800s very clearly, and even up into the middle of the 1950s, even, and all the way through the Civil Rights Act, and we're still incurring some of that to this day and seeing some of those effects. I mean, when you think about it, the 1900s is really only a couple of generations away. I mean, it could be anybody's great grandmother, it could be their great great grandmother, and so that generational wealth that we talked about at the very beginning, when we talked about equity, it's the same thing here, right? There is a generational curse, if you will, that they have to live through. And so when it comes to reparations, I don't think reparations have to be a blank check, nor do I really, again, going back to my means testing, I don't think that I don't think that a blank check is the solution here. I think the solution is more of, again, investing in schools and certain minority, primarily minority neighborhoods. It could be, and also providing, if necessary, a check, which I think would be wild, is if they can prove by some way or another that their genealogy linked back to slavery, or that they have some kind of harm that was done. I believe we saw some of this done. I believe it was for Asian Americans or Native Americans, one of the two. I think it was Asian Americans. So I think having that particular thing would be probably more the route that I would go. I wouldn't be more of the progressive side where they say, like, UBI, hey, here's a blank check. That's just not my approach. My approach is more logical, in that, look, if you want to do reparations, let's try to find a way that we can make this as means tested as possible. Let's put a lot of qualifications here that make sure that those people who do actually deserve this do deserve it. And it's not somebody who's just like, hey, I want to, even though I may have immigrated from somewhere else in like the last 10 years, I deserve something. No, I mean, there has to be some kind of a actual harm that was done in order to be able to qualify for some kind of a reparation, whatever that may be.
Okay. I disagree. And I'm going to kind of go through my notes real quick. There's actually, if we're talking about reparations right now today, I got a I should have brought that picture up. I had a picture of Spike Lee at the
Yeah.
NBA All-Star game with a big jacket on that says, "We want reparations now. We want our 40 acres and a mule." And I'm like, the irony of a multimillionaire saying he wants reparations, that irony is not lost on me at all. And shout out to Spike Lee. He is an alumni of Morehouse College, and he's wrong. There are no actual victims in today, nor are there any perpetrators. So I would say that maybe my great-grandfather was a slave. Maybe my great-grandmother was a sharecropper. That does not invariably mean that I'm a victim. And it is maybe Vince, maybe your grandparents or whatever were slave owners. Maybe they did drive a ship over here. Maybe so. That doesn't mean that you're a perpetrator. Why are you guilty for that? And I have scripture evidence for that case. But then even more than that, because there isn't a perpetrator and because there isn't a victim, there's not a sin. What have you done, Vince, to me? Or I'm using you as the representation of all less melanated people. And I'm using myself as a representation of all highly melanated people. What have you done that you need to pay me for? So because there's no perpetrator and there are no victims, there's no crime. What is a fair remedy for this imaginary crime? Why is $20 million to me an effective remedy? Who says it is? Who says that any of that is? So we don't have a perpetrator. We don't have a victim. We don't have a crime. We don't have a remedy. But then also, we don't know that that's we don't know that that is going to be a resolution to the problem. Who's to say that in 100 years, my great-grandchildren say, hey, great-granddad, dear old Christian, they gave him a check for $20 million, but it really should have been $100 million. So since you did pay great-granddad, dear old Christian, you owe us the 80 that you didn't pay him. Well, how does this ever end? And there isn't, since we don't have victims, we don't have perpetrators, we don't have a crime, we don't have a resolution, and we don't have the proper remedy, there's no way of saying that this will not continue and continue to go on and on. So that's my reasoning and rationale why I don't support reparations. But go ahead.
I mean, so there's not a direct victim per se. There is a victim by way of generational curses. And what I mean by that is that somebody, again, I go back to their great grandmother, even their grandmother, because again, depending on how far you take this, is that just because, slavery ended in the late 1800s does not mean that there was certain, say Jim Crow laws or certain things of that nature that, we look at the fact that we didn't have the Civil Rights Act until the 1960s. And so the issue there is in a lot of cases, 1960s, you still have a lot of people, even still now to this day, that were alive during that time. I've talked to a few of them myself. And so those people are direct victims of that particular era. When we had the MLK marches and things of that nature, there are some people that I've talked to that went through those marches and were met with fire hoses and dogs and things of that nature. They are victims. And this is why I'm saying is that when we talk about reparations, now the perpetrators is an interesting one, right? Because I guess you could say my ancestors may have. Do reparations inherently mean that I have to pay for it? Well, I may pay for it via the way of taxes. All people end up paying for it via the way of taxes, but it wouldn't be like a reparation tax that I myself am paying to the government as a reparation tax. It would be some kind of a governmental benefit. Now, you said $15 million. There are people out there.
Number. Oh yeah, I've heard numbers like that.
I've heard some crazy ones too. I don't think it should be $15 million. Let's be very.
I don't think it should be
very clear.
It shouldn't be at all. But I got you.
Yeah. So I think the thing is that there should be some kind of way for there to be some kind of, if you want to call it a reparation, if you want to call it some kind of a settlement, whatever you may be, for those who were harmed by these policies that the government enacted. And
so most people are talking about reparations from slavery. They're not talking about Jim Crow. They're not talking about the civil rights movement. They're talking about slavery. So we're talking about that 1800s era. So that's where I'm landing. Because yes, you could talk. You probably have grandparents or great grandparents definitely who were involved in that. But they're talking about slavery specifically. So that when Spike Lee was talking about slavery, not civil rights. But go ahead.
Yeah, so it's important to note, though, that even when slavery ended, the racial policies of the government did not end in the 1890s. There were
No
still
problem.
racial policies all the way up until the 1960s.
Mhm.
And so those reparations are more so towards the fact that the government had enacted these policies all the way up to the 1960s. So even if you want to go back as far as slavery, that's completely fine. But the reality is that those policies lasted way longer than the 1890s. And again, if you want to go back to slavery, we could certainly try to do that as well. Look at genealogy records if possible. I don't know. And this is another issue that I believe we saw when it came to birthright citizenship, which is a little bit kind of off topic, but on topic, is that there wasn't a whole lot of documentation that these people had when they initially came here, right? So that's a big issue. So again, we could try to certainly go down that route. I think for me, if you were to ask me what I believe reparations are, because I think that's super important as well, is that I think it goes down to the fact that there were people that were harmed by these governmental policies, and as such, they are entitled to some kind of compensation, if you will, for that harm. Now, to what that is, I think it should be maybe in the form of, which community saw the biggest things, like literal communities saw the most egregious things happen to them, and look to ways to try to provide government funding to maybe the schools, maybe to housing programs, maybe it's to, maybe it is in the form of a check. If you can actually prove all the way through to your genealogy, all the way to slavery, if you could do that, hey, you might be entitled to a check. Now, I don't think $15 million is necessarily appropriate. Where do I draw that line? I don't know. What I can say 20,000, 50,000. I don't know. Even then, I don't even like the idea of a blank check, because more times than not, we find that blank checks don't actually solve the problem. In a lot of cases, it can make it worse. So I'd rather see it go to some kind of actual like program, whether, like I said, housing or schools or things like that.
Okay. No, I hear you. And I'll explain from the scriptures why I disagree with that. And I'm going to look at Ezekiel 18. I bring this up quite a bit. And just to paraphrase, you're welcome to check out Ezekiel 18. Am I muted? Okay. I thought somebody said I was muted. Sorry.
Oh, no. You're good.
Ezekiel 18. And summarizing, just giving a quick paraphrase. It says, if a man is committing evil and his son sees that he commits evil and he does not do what his dad does, the son will not have to pay for his dad's sin. But on the same note, if the son sees his dad doing evil and the son continues in that evil, the son will pay for the father's sin in that the son has done those sins. So if we, again, coming back to slavery, I don't know who knows, maybe my parents might have been slave owners. I don't know. That happened as well. So therefore, should I pay because my parents, my great grandparents owned slaves, or they were beneficiaries of some bad laws and such of that nature? That makes no sense at all. And it only creates more problems than it will ever solve. And so I always look at Ezekiel 18 and I say, the great example is, as for his father, because he practiced extortion, he robbed his brother, and he did what was not good among his people, behold, he shall die for his iniquity. And the reason I bring up Ezekiel 18 is it talks about how he saw his dad doing these things. If my dad was not doing that, if your dad wasn't doing that, because again, who knows that you might have migrated here? My parents and your parents might have been on the same boat, just migrating over here. It doesn't mean just because I got black skin, I was a slave. It doesn't mean because you have less melanated skin that you were a slave owner. Now, sure, there's some bad things that happened in U.S. history. Absolutely. And we're not overlooking those. What we are saying, however, is that the remedy for that is, I believe the remedy has already been wrought in that through the civil rights era. Now we are moving forward. You and I have the same opportunities. You and I can go to our kids can go to the same schools. We have all the opportunities that they fought for, that those slaves dreamt about. We are living those out. Why are we looking back in the past, live action role playing? It makes no sense. But go ahead.
Yeah, so this is really interesting, because the idea is that my sins are not the sins of my parents or my parents, parents, right? Facts. But it's important to note too, though, that again, this again goes back to where we look at the view. For me, I'm not, well, I guess you could say I'm paying it, but I view this as a different kind of thing. So if I look at this more like a debt, if you will, that is owed back to these people who were harmed by the government. When you have an issue of someone who's being harmed by the government, there's a debt that is owed to that person if they are harmed by the government. We see this in a lot of times of lawsuits and things of that nature as well when we have the government. And so I think you ought to pay that debt back. And I think by paying that debt back, what you would end up finding is that many people, and I've already mentioned this, have gone through that. And you may say, well, I have the same opportunities, but do we really? Because there are people, like I said, all the way up to the 1960s, which is incredibly important, because you have people that were born in the 60s and had children, and those children are probably living, just by nature of studies and everything has shown, that you don't really move very far away from where your parents lived, who are still living within those same communities and have not had the same opportunities. They say somebody who was living in an affluent suburban or rural area, they don't have those necessarily same opportunities, because for one generation, that's all that they've known is that inner city area that's been plagued by a whole number of things, right? So again, it goes back to, I'm not looking for equal outcomes. I'm not saying that I want somebody who grew up in the inner city to all of a sudden become a millionaire, but it's to say, hey, look, we recognize that there has been irreparable harm done by the government. And as such, we want to invest in your community, however that may be, whether it's in schools, whether it's in housing programs or things of that nature. That is what I'm referring to when it comes to reparations.
Okay.
And yeah, so I don't think that it's something to me that it is, again, it goes back to just paying, essentially the government paying back a debt that they're owed. Got you.
Can you tell me anywhere that there's not government schools, government housing programs, government? I mean, I can't think of one place that doesn't have them, but we already have those now. So
we do.
And I'm a former classroom teacher. I can tell you here in Atlanta, they're not really run the best. They're not really they're not really knocking the ball out the park every day, any day. Right. So they have them. We already have government funded schools in every major inner city, and they are not necessarily as competitive. We can look at some pretty abysmal numbers of graduation rates, school readiness, job readiness, or college readiness and job readiness numbers, and they're not killing it. And they spend more money than anybody else. Atlanta spends a lot of money per child. But I'm just making that point, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think that to some element speaks kind of what I was saying more so. You may say that the funding was adequate, but it doesn't change the fact that those people who have lived in that community for the longest time are still living through some of those inequities, right? Because you're saying in a lot of cases, what you'll see is that inner city children end up having poorer outcomes than those in suburban areas. And so what you have to look at is again, you also look at property tax, right? I mean, just by nature of how schools are funded, right? If you're in an inner city community who doesn't have a whole lot of funding to begin with, they're going to be underfunded and a lot of times overcrowded. Whereas a suburban community, which is going to be a little bit more affluent, just a little bit, maybe not a whole lot, they're going to have a lot more funds to be able to provide for their schooling, in which case you might have a little bit more funds to have better programs and better outcomes. So yeah.
I'm going to have to push back. I live in a suburb of Atlanta and it's affluent. Okay. And Atlanta public schools still spends more money per child than my school district does. And Atlanta public spends more than pretty much all the districts. And their product, the widget that they put out every year, is not better than the widgets that come out of other places. It's not a funding issue. It's not a funding issue. I can tell you that hands down, as sure as my name is Jason. It's not a funding issue. I mean, there are schools all around the United States that crush it, that pay far less, that put in far less money per child than Atlanta Public does, and they're crushing it. But then there's also schools that do put out far more, and they get far worse product. So even far worse than what we're already talking about. So I don't think that's the need. And again, I understand what you're saying. I think that's like more of I argue that government should get out of education. I argue that government needs to be out of that, and that needs to be, if not federal government, definitely should be a local government, at best a state government situation. But I don't want to get too far off the field. Yeah. When we're looking at reparations, again, I don't know why I didn't pull up that picture of Spike Lee. Matter of fact, I should have it up. Spike Lee at he was not talking about schools. He's not talking about schools. He's talking about money. Here it is, right here.
Sure.
Here. He's talking about bread in his pocket. That's what Mr. Lee is talking about. He's not talking about anything else but putting some extra bread in his pocket. And to me, that's super problematic because, and I'm using, when I say you, I'm just, I understand it would be it would be money that the government would be given. I don't think they're going to tax you primarily, but they are in essence, they are. So this is Spike Lee. We want our 40 acres and a mule. Yes, reparations. And I think he's meant, I don't know what that means. No centrifuge or something. I don't know. No substitute. I don't know what that is at the very, very bottom.
Subterfuge. Looks
Okay,
like subterfuge. Yeah.
Okay. But this man is a multimillionaire, multi times over. And he's actually asking for reparations. Like, what you going to go ahead?
Yeah, I don't think he's asking himself for reparations. I think we're seeing the same thing that we saw with, say, Colin Kaepernick, right? Is that they have a platform, a very large platform at that they're bringing light to. And I think the fact that we're talking about this when I believe didn't this take place quite a few years ago?
No, this was last
last night?
Yeah.
Last weekend? Okay.
Yeah. This at the NBA, as far as I know, is it the NBA game?
Okay, that's fine. No, that's perfectly fine. So either way, though, I mean, the idea is that it got people talking, and I think that's totally cool. I mean, we saw that with Kendrick Lamar, for example, when there was a lot of messaging in there, and I believe 40 acres and a mule was also mentioned in the Super Bowl as well. So I don't know if also this was something that was tied into that as well. It's certainly possible if this was recent. But again, I think it's celebrities really using their platform to get out a message. And I see no problem with this. I don't think Spike Lee in and of himself wants 40 acres and a mule. I think, like you said, he's got plenty of money, and if he were to suggest that, then yeah, that'd be really silly and absurd. Those people who are calling for $15 million, I think, it's a little absurd. I don't know where $15 million comes from. But yeah.
Yeah, and if they're asking for 15 million now, why would they not ask for 30 next Tuesday? So I don't think that there's any, and I do believe that somebody should call Spike Lee's bluff and say, "Hey, Spike, come up here. We're gonna write you a check, Mr. Lee, directly to you," and see what he would say. Because no, I guarantee you, sure as my name's Jason, he would take it. Now, whether or not he would put it somewhere, but he would take that check and say, "Well, you're done now. This is your 40 acres. This is your mule." That would be the end of it. Subterfuge, deceit used in order to receive one's goal. Okay.
Yeah, I
don't know. And shout out to Peach, just me, fantastic researcher, helps us out a lot. I don't know what that means. But Spike Lee is another kind of cat. My name is Jason dearwokec@gmail.com. I don't get what he means by that, but I digress.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, I don't believe that you, Vince, is a man who's been blessed with not as much melanin as I've been blessed with. I don't think the Lord didn't see fit that both of us had equal outcomes of melanin, but I don't think that you would owe me anything. I don't think that the United States owes me anything. And I'm not, I don't know. I don't know if my grandparents were slaves or whatever like that, but guess what? Many people don't. So I don't believe that is a right way to look at what we have here in this American experiment, because please keep in mind, we've been the most prosperous nation. Sure, we have some problems, man. We have some dark points in our history, but guess what? They're in our rearview mirror, and we could be looking forward at the opportunities that we have to work together, to collaborate, to all these kind of great things, but we can't move forward, as somebody said, because we're spending so much time looking back in the rearview mirror. And dare I say, we've actually stopped the car and just turned around altogether. But we have such an opportunity, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time worrying about woulda, shoulda, couldas, or maybes, but rather say, hey man, this is a great opportunity right now that I have to take advantage of this economy, take advantage of this technology, take advantage of these opportunities that have come my way, and they're in front of me rather than what was possible behind me. And I feel like reparations only does that. It only, and dare I say, it's going to be super. Let me just make a crazy world. Everybody with less melanin, they do the paper bag test. Everybody who falls under a certain melanin content, they have to write a check, like a real bona fide tax. How does that work? How would that make you as a less melanated person? How would that make you feel? You know what I'm saying, Vince? Like that's not going to engender strong emotional feelings and positive emotional feelings, forgive me, toward your highly melanated brothers and sisters when you say, man, I had to pay $6,000 as a white tax because reparations. I'm being hyperbole, but I don't think it's really that crazy. But go ahead.
Yeah. No, so I think, so one of the issues here is, you said it's behind us. I don't know if I would 100% agree with that. Now, by the government's hand, maybe, but I'd have to look a little more into that. In terms of like just the everyday man, we're seeing what I would call a reversion back a little bit. We're going backwards. And what I mean by that is we can look at the fact that we had, right now with immigration, they have the immigration hotline, and it has been bombarded with calls, and there has been policies, and Donald Trump as such has been very open about the fact of doing things like stop and frisk, which is inherently prejudicial to different minorities.
Okay.
So we're seeing things where we are moving, what in my opinion feels like we're going backwards than we are moving forward. We're also seeing, we can say, me and you talked a little bit about DEI, but we can talk about the fact that Donald Trump removed, I think it was Title VII, I think is what it was, or no, it was the executive order. Oh, that's what it is. Equal employment opportunity. That one, but that one was for federal contractors, but it still provided unique protections that were not offered in the Civil Rights Act. It was kind of like I think it was gender orientation, which is outside of race, but we're seeing certain chiseling away of that. We also see the chiseling away of birthright citizenship and things of that nature. Now, these are all, there's a lot of topics there, right? So I'm going to try to bring it back. But I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on, because we talked earlier about the Japanese internment camps and the reparations that were done for those people. Where do you stand on that particular part?
Excellent question. Those crimes and those sins were committed against those people in real time. The Japanese people today have no right to ask for reparations because their great-grandparents were in an internment camp. So those were paid directly to those people for lack of a better term, in real time. Those reparations, those were paid to people directly. Same thing with, I think there was some kind of reparations which I didn't understand why they were given to Germany, but those were in real time. We're talking about something that wasn't done in real time. And so why are we doing this today? Now, I'm not saying that it's right that they did promise 40 acres a mule, they didn't do it, but this is not the first and it won't be the only promise America has made that didn't fall through. But that doesn't change anything. That, again, Spike Lee, I should have left him back up. Spike Lee doesn't have the right to ask for anything, nor do I. And I don't expect you, nor Mandy or anyone else to fund that. So therein would be my push.
Yeah. Would you say, though, that somebody who was alive, say, during the civil rights movement, where they were hosed down by, fire hoses and have beaten and
dogs,
dogs and all that,
sue them?
Would you
sue them right now in real time? If you had been one of those marchers and that happened, then you sue them, and that makes sense. But why would your great grandchildren do it? So
would you have said that we should have had the Japanese sue the government, or how? Because that's what I'm trying to understand. Is like, if the idea is that we give the Japanese this reparation. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah. I cut you off. No. You're good.
I don't fully understand the meaning behind why we gave reparations to the Japanese, but that was done. But again, if sicking dogs, if like, for example, somebody sick dogs on somebody right now today, and it was inappropriate, that would be police misconduct. You can sue. You have the right to do that. So if that been the case, then do the exact same thing now. That would be my only pushback. Like, sue, go through the proper means and such of that nature. But that doesn't mean everybody that was in an 8-block radius deserves a paycheck from the police department. Doesn't make sense. So that would be me.
Well,
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, and I think that's the biggest issue, right? And that's what we're talking about when it comes down to reparations, is that we have to look at the fact of what has been done to those communities, which there are many people alive to this day, and I know I'm a broken record on this, but who experienced that, and their children who had to live through that particular thing. So now, again, I'll go back to, does it mean that we should be giving out blank checks? I don't think so. Do I think that there has to be other ways that we can provide reparations to those individuals? Certainly. I think there's certainly ways that we can do that. Now, we talked a little bit about schooling. Get it. Understood. Sometimes government funding. Maybe we end up helping them out with housing vouchers or something along those lines, right? There has to be other ways that we can help immediately resolve some of those harms that were done to them by the federal government. And again, I'd be curious to see if you would consider it reparations if they won that lawsuit, because by nature they won that lawsuit because the federal government did harm to them in regards to their civil rights. But keep in mind, at that time, that would have been totally allowed. So you have to look at it in the context of the law at that time. And at the time, they were allowed to do that. They got away with it. So what would they sue for to begin with?
Yeah, I would. If we're going to use that, then that is. I hate to be like that, but what else would you be doing if you're not going to sue them? If you're saying that I can't sue them because it's legal, then that therein is the rub. I mean, we can't go back retroactively and sue things and change things because back at one time it was something, it was allowed, and now in modern parlance it's not. That's again sins of the father and sins of the son. I don't think that we can do that. So if you're not going to sue them, and I wouldn't call it reparations, I'm just saying it was the right thing to do. They recognize that there was a wrong that was done. But go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I was going to say, I mean, that's my whole thing, right? Is that there is a solution. If you can't sue, is to provide them some kind of relief for the harm that was done, right? Because otherwise they don't have any way to actually bring suit against the government, because at the time it was legal. So if they have no other remedy, then the remedy would seem to be that it should be reparations. Now, we could talk about what that reward or reparation should be. Yeah.
I don't know if we would get, I personally think that we would open up a Pandora's box that we would have no idea. Example being, several years ago, seatbelts were not exactly the same kind of 5-point seatbelts that we have now. So if somebody's parent passed away because cars didn't have seatbelts like that back then, and now we're looking at it now and say, hey, well, you should have had these kind of seatbelts. I mean, we could literally get to the point where we are retroacting everything that's happened in the past. And I don't think that's where we want to go. So I don't agree with that. And I don't think that looking at people and say, well, you're deficient because of this was done to somebody down the line in your family, therefore we're going to do this for you. To me, I don't think that that's working. We don't see it working today. We don't see that vouchers are housing vouchers are making people necessarily that much better off today. We don't see that. Or again, our schools are not necessarily better off. So I don't believe that that would be the right avenue to have. And I think if we remove that option off the table and say, this is not a discussion that we're having, but what we will do is start moving forward. Because again, we're busy looking back in the rearview mirror, talking about Tulsa, we're talking about Birmingham, we're talking about these things in the past, and there's opportunities in front of us that we're missing because we're busy looking back in the past. But go ahead.
Yeah, I think the issue with the seatbelt thing, though, is that it wasn't intentionally done, whereas in this case, the government intentionally sat and set sick dogs on them and fire hoses and everything else. I think one is an intentional act, whereas the other one is just simply for the fact that the studies were showing that this wasn't a really safe measure until after the fact.
Cigarettes. Yeah, I mean,
That's
there were
an
studies.
interesting one.
Yeah, there were cigarettes. So again, we can go back and sue the Marlboro Man or Camel and such of that nature. Again, I think we would open up a Pandora's box that I think we would definitely unequivocally regret. Like, dang, how did we end up getting here?
I feel like literally suit though. That's why we have those warnings on the label now, right?
Right,
I don't know
but
if that was part of legislation, but yeah.
But my granddad, he didn't get it. He wasn't a part of that. So I want to sue now. I could see that being the case very quickly. Like, hey, well, my granddad died of cigarette. He was a 4-pack a day smoker, and he died, and he wasn't aware of this. And therefore, as I mentioned earlier on, my mother is a polio survivor. She contracted polio the year before the vaccine was made available. Hey, they should have got that vaccine out sooner. Because my mom, she has a scar on her arm. All of your grandparents had that scar on their arm where they got the vaccine, but it didn't work because she had already contracted it. I want reparations for that. I want some kind. We could, and again, this could go down a very crazy rabbit hole, and you'll probably say, "Well, Jason, you're really being hyperbole." But guess what? They're using the Civil Rights Act for everybody else now. So all they need is for them to kick open the door of reparations, and you'll be seeing reparations on everybody under the sun. And so I disagree with that wholeheartedly. But
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, the issue is, though, like with your cigarette example, is that's even still pretty dramatically different than what took place in the 60s. It wasn't like the people walked into the streets and said, "Hey, hose me down. Hey, stick a dog on me."
You're right.
It was, and no one really put a cigarette. The government certainly, I mean, I guess you could say through maybe false advertising or something along those lines, which again, I think maybe is something that would probably have been regular. I'd have to look. I don't know the history of cigarettes.
I was being bombastic, but I mean, but my point is, notice how the civil rights movement has become the train that has brought everybody else into port now. I mean, into the station. Everybody else is hooking their train up to this, and because of my skin color, everybody's now using this and becoming minorities. Everybody's using this and becoming some kind of disenfranchised group. Am I to believe that once they say, "Hey, the highly melanated people, you're going to get reparations," and then somebody else's group won't attach onto that in 5 years, 10 years? Because please understand, the civil rights movement was almost 60 years ago, but now we're doing this in real time every day. There's another group tagging onto it.
Yeah, I think for me, I think the thing is that just because something can happen down the road doesn't mean that we shouldn't still address the harm that was done. I think we still ought to address that harm that was done, and then maybe put in place, if we are concerned about there being some kind of a particular issue coming down the pike, maybe try to stem that tide off. Maybe put it into legislation that, hey, this is only for a period of time, whatever. At the end of the day, you're not going to necessarily stop the movement by not addressing it. It'll only make the issue much larger. By not addressing it, it's just going to continue to have that contention from one generation to the next. So again, I think, and I also think that there's a unique difference here. So if you had, like, say, white people come out and go, "Hey, I'm due my reparations," how? I guess is the question, right? Because there's
My great granddad was black.
And what about it?
His a white person's great granddad was black, and therefore,
you're saying right?
Yeah. So, and now they might look as lily white as the day is Monday, but that doesn't mean that their great granddad was not black. No. So now, absolutely. Well, so now we've created another. Yep. Now we create new categories. Well, if you're however much black, how much black are you? Black. This could really go into complete and utter insanity.
No.
Go ahead.
So it doesn't even have to be like that. I mean, again, reparations are reparations. It doesn't matter what your skin tone is, quite frankly. At the end of the day, it's a fact of, was your family harmed? If you happen to be, if you're white and you have a African-American history or black history or whatever, then you can absolutely, if you're prove that your family was harmed by the government, it shouldn't matter based on skin. In fact, I would argue that if they did that, it would violate so many laws. It's unreal.
But they've been doing it. But so you do see that we would have to do, because we've decided now we're going to let's just go back to the check writing and just say that there's going to be a check of some amount, some quantity.
Right.
And say that, well, if so much of your family, like, where does it stop? Like, did they have to have been slaves, or were they sharecroppers? Did they come after, but they experienced the antebellum South, or did they come during the civil rights movement? Like, we're gonna have layers and tiers and such like that. And really, when the smoke clears, I challenge that it's not going to make much of a difference, because we have a lot of those stopgaps in place right now. We don't see them working. So just writing a check doesn't guarantee that you're going to fix the problem, because, again, as I said earlier, what is the sin? But go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, the thing is, for me, is it's not about, here's the issue, right? Mm-hmm. Is there is a way to try to fix some of that irreversible harm that was done by this person. There's a way to try to fix it. And this is why I mentioned, again, it doesn't have to be funding through schooling or whatever we can do to try to address the harm that was done to that particular community, especially, then we can do that. I don't think, and this is why I've said, I don't think a check resolves anything. I think if anything, all it does is put money into a person's pocket. Also, it's going to lead to hyperinflation. We don't want inflation. So we have to do this in a very strategic manner to say, hey, look, the government did something to you that was wrong, and we need to correct that course, however that may be. And again, I don't think it's necessarily trying to, I guess some of it is trying to correct the wrongs that were done. But at the same time, it's more of an acknowledgement as well, saying, hey, we recognize that at this date and time or this period or whatever, your family was harmed by this particular action. Here is your payout for that harm that was done. And they estimate the harm that was done by a monetary value or by some kind of investment into the community, housing voucher, whatever it may be. I don't think reparations, again, I think the money thing is probably the one thing that I would probably be like, I get it.
I just was using it because I feel like all the other services we can pretty quickly knock those over that they don't work. I want to get this question right here. And this is to me. So I love pushback. So I'm gonna big screen this one because I want to make sure I get this one my full throated. Don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere. All right. This person said something to me, and you know what? I love when people comment to me, but please don't bring to me stuff that's going to make me have to do this. DWC, how can you say that we're moving forward? Because we are. Let me continue. And they're killing us every day in our houses. Where is that? Show me book, chapter, verse in context where they are, I don't know who they are, that's killing us in our houses every day. I want to see that. Let us continue. In the streets, in the jails, on camera, in front of our faces. Show me it. And when you show me that, I will show you the number of little black and brown babies that have been completely eviscerated in their mother's womb by Planned Parenthood. So if you give me the same smoke and the same energy, Crush 1933, if you give me that same amount of energy and that same amount of pushback about Planned Parenthood, then we can talk. But until then, do me a favor, be quiet. All right. I'm sorry about that. I don't like that kind of stuff because it's just silliness. But let us continue. Now, here's another question. I think this is for you. So now we also need to give reparations to Japanese Americans that were interned. What do you think?
Yeah, we've already given reparations, far as I understand, to those who were interred. Look, if I'm going to take a more contentious take, I think we're seeing some undocumented immigrants, actually U.S. citizens, even allegedly, and we don't know all the facts just yet, that are potentially being even sent to Gitmo. So we're probably going to see a similar situation pop right up here in the near future. I certainly hope not. But yeah, I think as far as that question goes, I think they were already given reparations. And should they have been given reparations? Yeah.
So
the government
so Japanese internment during the Second World War and persons being detained and deported to Gitmo are the same.
They certainly can be. They're kind of in the same. And the idea of what happened in the 1940s with Japan was after Pearl Harbor, they saw that there were several Japanese spies and they were concerned. And so they ended up rounding up anybody who was even looked Japanese and ended up interring them into a camp. And we see something similar playing that out right now, where we're seeing U.S. citizens being rounded up just for the sake of them, not even maybe being able to provide documents or whatever it may be, that they're an undocumented citizen. So we are seeing them being rounded up. Is it U.S. citizens? Some of them, there's been allegations that there have been U.S. citizens that have been rounded up in these things. And keep in mind, too, that, and it's a little bit different, sure, than Japanese Americans, but undocumented immigrants are entitled to constitutional rights while they are here and entitled to due process as well. So there is a similarity. Is it a one-for-one comparison? Probably not one-for-one, but it is an extremely close comparison.
So if, let's say, 30 criminals walk into your house, walk onto your property, set up shop, on your lawn, backyard, in your house, and such of that nature. How many of them do you get rid of when you have the means and ability to get them off of your property, out of your house? How many do you get rid of? There's 30 of them. How many do you get rid of?
I mean, there's a whole lot of facts that have to go into this.
No,
One, how did they get in? How did they
walk
get in
right-
the backyard? And
They crawled over your fence. They jumped
Mhm.
over your fence. You have a fence around your house. They jumped over your fence and they maybe kicked your front door open. Your garage door was open because you were letting the sun in, and they just walked in through your garage door and came into your kitchen. So sure, there was a true breaking of the door. There's some walking in, jumping on the fence. How many do you keep? And you don't know which ones of the 30 did any of those things, but you know they did it. How many do you keep?
Yeah, in this analogy, I think it's a little bit disanalogous to the current situation we're going on. But in this scenario, I would call the police and have them removed. However,
How many,
in the situation with whoever ended up coming into my house illegally, and to be clear, that would actually be a felony. And so what we're seeing here with the undocumented immigrants that have come across the border, they are committing a misdemeanor by illegal entry, which is USC 1325. And so what I would say is that the more appropriate analogy is that someone is knocking at your door asking if they can come in, and then you are left with a decision of do you let that person in or not. In which case, I would say statistically. Yeah,
oh, that's cool. But is that what we're talking about at the border? I mean, you're in Texas, for crying out loud. Is that what we're talking about? Are we talking about people that are standing at the gate or at the border crossing, knocking, asking to come in? Or are we talking about people who've made their own way in? And I think that's the question that I'm asking. I'm not talking about the people that do it the correct way, that follow the proper steps. And we're talking about people that are not following the steps. How many of them do you keep?
Right. So obviously, I would say that the statistical likelihood that any of those people that are coming across the border are criminals is extremely low. I think if you put the numbers at upwards of 15 to 20 million people, I think the most that we've ever seen that are like actual criminals is in the ballpark of 300 or 400,000, which there's a lot of contention around that FBI data point. What I would say is that based on that measure alone, if 400,000 of those 15 million are criminals, statistically speaking, they're more likely to be, regular, working undocumented immigrants. And
so
to be clear, go.
So if they're working at the grocery store, the local grocery store, they work at the local gas station, they have a thriving business, but they have now taken up occupancy in your house. I'm not saying that they're criminals out there. Are they not criminals now that they've entered into your home without your permission? Whether it be walked through the door, kicked over the door, climbed over the fence, aren't they criminals now?
So again, I go back to the point where I think this is completely disanalogous. I think the kicking down the door would be obviously
they just walk in.
Yeah. So if they walk in, which I think to your point about the setting up shop, I would say it's not like they're coming into my house and setting up shop. Rather, they're going and buying a home next door and setting up a home there. I think is more analogous.
Well, that's fair. Well, in this scenario, you are now the United States, and you have your border around you, your fence. So they have now set up shop in your living room. They're down in your basement. They're in your bedroom. They're using your bathroom. They are in your house doing their life, and they might still walk outside the fence and go work, but they're coming in your crib. I mean, are you keeping them all? Some of them? How many are you keeping?
If they knocked at the door and said, "Hey, can I come in?" I go, "Sure." I mean,
they didn't knock at the door. They just rolled up on you. You just looked in the backyard, and they built a little tiny house in your backyard. Like what do you? How's that working?
Yeah. So I think the idea that someone is coming in and busting down your door, I think would speak more to the analogy of criminal undocumented immigrants. And when I say criminal, I'm going to be very clear. I'm talking about those who've actually come into this country and then committed a crime. I think the more akin analogy here would be that somebody walks into your neighborhood and they're kind of walking around selling candy versus someone who walks in and starts looking to try to bust down doors. Those two undocumented immigrants are going to be totally, completely different. And so what I'm saying is that, first of all, the people who do come across the border, I want to make this clear. You can still apply for asylum, even if you don't go to a port of entry. This is very clear. You can look at the asylum laws. You can still do that. And I think that once you step foot on this particular piece of ground of the United States, you are entitled to certain due process and constitutional rights. And so, again, to the point and example of whether I would let them set up shop, well, it would depend. If they bust down my door, because there are undocumented immigrants that do commit crimes here in the United States outside of the federal code of 1325. Those particular people who come in here and commit those crimes absolutely should be gone, by the way. So,
So if
to be clear, yeah.
so if I got it right, you
Mhm.
I could, as long as I didn't bust down the door. Again, you are
Mhm.
bringing your groceries, and I say, "Hey, he's got his garage door open, and he's got his kitchen door open, and I'm gonna roll right on in here."
Yeah,
Now I didn't,
that would that
now I'm inside. What we got? What are we doing?
yeah, absolutely. If they're inside, then they would be what I would classify as the criminal undocumented migrant, and I would ask them to be removed.
But how am I a criminal if I come into your house, but I'm not a criminal if I come into the United States? Why don't I have that?
So this is a great point, because this is something that I think a lot of people end up doing is there are people who will say that there is a criminal, an undocumented immigrant who is a criminal for the simple act of violating USC 1325, which is a misdemeanor at most. And
Okay.
even then is typically only handed a fine or good time served and moved on their merry way. And then they are handled by ICE and immigrations to be handled in that regard. So
Okay.
I think the other issue here too is that the question is what do they do when they are here in the United States outside of that particular crossing? Because I think there's a big issue between a felony crime and a misdemeanor crime. I think felonies are a little bit more inherently violent, not always necessarily the case, but in many cases it can be, or that is depriving somebody of their particular rights. Where a misdemeanor is kind of like you can get like a, in some cases a traffic infraction that is a misdemeanor. I think we would agree there's different levels to that criminality. I don't think all criminals are the same. And so in the same regard, we should look at these undocumented immigrants as individuals. We should see, how have you been doing when you're in this country? Are you somebody who is contributing to your local, community? Are you working? Are you providing? In some cases, many immigrants will actually pay and get an I-10 and pay into the federal taxes, even though they get nothing out of it, because they hope, and this is from what I understand, they hope that one day when they do get that approval, that will help them, even though that's not even really taken into consideration is how much taxes they paid. But they do that thinking they will. And so that person versus those people we are seeing all over the mainstream media who are committing these crimes here in the United States, they should absolutely be gone. They have no contributed to society. They're the ones that are busting down the door, entering in through the garage.
Okay.
So I think that's kind of what I'm saying is like, who would I let in first, right? Would I let the person in who comes and knocks on my door saying, "Hey, I'm the new neighbor. Here's some cookies. Can we have a chat?" Yeah, of course. Hey, man, what's going on? Let's come on in. Let's talk. Versus the person who kicks down the door with, I'm using TikTok language, but like a pew pew. Oh, well, obviously, I'm gonna be like, "Yo, get this person out of here."
Understand.
I think there's two, and they could all be from the same neighborhood, right? But one comes in with a basket of cookies, the other one comes in with kicking down my door with a pew pew. So.
No, I got you. So real quick, so Gene Lee asked you, how do you feel about illegals getting tax dollars? Please understand, they're getting tax dollars, whether that be housing, food vouchers, transportation. They're getting far more than even you or myself are getting as U.S. citizens. Shelter, food, anyway. Why Americans get nothing? How do you? So the rights and responsibilities of the people that come into your house, your children are not getting what they would get if these people were not in your house. Go ahead.
Yeah. So illegals getting tax dollars, it depends. So a lot of it is handled at the state. They're not entitled to any kind of federal benefits. They're usually handled by the states, first and foremost, which again, if you have an issue with that, then take it up with the state, bring it up to your legislator. As far as Americans getting nothing, no, Americans do get something. They get those federal benefits. And they also get state benefits as well. So you could argue that they get more, but I understand that there is the equation that people bring up all the time, by the way, which is how they take out as much as they put in. But the thing with that is it's to try to inflate it. They combine, what is it? I think it's state, local, and federal. I have to look at the number again. It's been a little bit, but they end up conflating it to make it look as if every taxpayer is paying, $5,000 per immigrant. But the reality is if you're in California and an immigrant in Texas is taking, SNAP benefits from Texas or whatever it may be, your person in California is not paying for that, because that's a state benefit. So That's kind of what I'm trying to say is that Americans, and you can still do two birds, one stone. This isn't like an idea that you can just only do one thing. We do multiple things in the government all the time. We're seeing that play out right now with Elon Musk and Doge.
Right. And Gene Lee just jumped back in. Oh, wait, sorry. Christy, sorry about that. But the states are getting federal dollars to feed and clothe, house illegal immigrants. And therein is the problem.
Right. So again, the federal dollars to feed, clothe, house illegal migrants. those, from what I've understood, is because, again, like if we look at, I think this is referring to possibly New York, maybe
New York, Chicago. There's many of them that are
right. And
that
so
are
because
drowning under this.
right. And a lot of what's going on there is that they're facing an existential crisis where there's these Republican states like Texas and Florida have bused these migrants to New York, have bused these migrants to Chicago and things like that.
Yeah.
And so the federal government, part of their DHS program and everything else like that, and I believe FEMA was even involved in that as well, which is under, I believe, DHS. I would have to look at it again. But anyways, they also have a hand in immigration. And so as such, like, I mean, we're trying to like get them on their way down the immigration process and trying to get them handled. I don't see any problem necessarily doing that. And again, it's housing them temporarily until they see their court date, whether that's via a private prison or whether that's them getting a voucher to go to a sponsor. And typically that sponsor may be a family member or something that's here in the United States. So it's essentially not paying their rent for the next year. It's more like, hey, here's a hub that we're funding to try to get these migrants out. That's what's happening with New York, for example.
Okay. So just to piggyback off of that, why not stem the faucet, turn off the spigot of new people coming in, so that, as somebody mentioned earlier, a lot of these people are coming in and we don't know what their status is. We don't know if they're good neighbors. We don't know if they're going to be the one that later on will kick in your door. We don't know that. So why not turn off the faucet for a moment, figure out who do we have. Some people need to leave. Some people need to get up out of here. And the people that are here, then go through whatever proper steps and such like that before we turn back on the spigot. Because I do think it's interesting that America is so racist that people are fighting and clamoring and climbing and crawling to get into this nation that is so racist, which just seems to take my breath away. But I digress. So why not stop the tide in order to figure out what we have so that we can make the right decisions?
That's a great question. So why we wouldn't do that is because the idea that you can just turn off the faucet is just not correct. And what I mean by that is that we have a very porous border as it is to begin with. Now they have set up certain buoys and razor wire and things like that in Texas, but that's not the case throughout the entire United States. So the reality is that when you end up deporting these people and sending them back to their countries, they're just going to try to come back to the United States. And we haven't already addressed, it's putting the cart before the horse. We haven't addressed the border. We haven't addressed our immigration processes. Mm-hmm. And so all you're going to do is essentially deport them. They're going to come right back. And it's just going to be like all for nothing. You're going to have spent $10 billion or whatever it may be, or $100 billion or $1 trillion, whatever, on deporting these people. And they're just going to be right back here in the United States.
But we cut off the pipeline to get them in. We've discouraged them to get in. So if we get them outside of your house and you have a better fence, we put them outside your house, you have a more secure door and a better protocol so that people can't just walk in through your garage and it's such of that nature, or hop over your back fence or whatnot like that. Isn't that? And then all they can do is come knock on the door. Because I don't think anybody's saying we don't want immigrants here. We don't want people to come into the United States. What we are saying is we don't want you to come in the United States utilizing services. I see lots of people talking about different people with food cards and rent paid and all these kind of things like that, when we're not taking care of even the people that are in our own country. We're not. Look at San Francisco. Look at LA. Look at what happened in North Carolina. It's kind of weird that we're giving away money to these people, but North Carolinians got $700. People in LA and are not even being able to reestablish their homes after the fires, and it's such like that. But don't worry, these people that came in, we're able to give them, a slap in the face to you, $6,700 on a food card. Staying in a very nice hotel, and you and your kids are jam packed in a Motel 6. To me, I think that's a little bit disingenuous, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to try to find the exact number, but so first to the point of North Carolina, they have actually, the $750 was for immediate assistance. Mm-hmm. I know me and Miss Mandy have talked about this at quite length. It was $750 to provide immediate assistance for like things like food, diapers, things like that. Here's Miss Mandy. She heard North Carolina. She popped right on in.
You say her name 3 times, she gonna pop up.
Did somebody send her name? Yeah. They sent us $750, and it took a while, but they did actually offer hotel for 30 days, which let me just say, some people lost their whole house. So 30 days ain't nothing. But it was the lowest of the low roach motel, like you would never ever stay in. Like you walk in and the bed bugs just jump on top of you, like Rice Street Hotel.
Oh no, not Rice Street.
Yeah, like it was bad. I would never consider staying in there ever. And it was really bad.
Yeah, so this is from FEMA's
and there are
website.
People, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Doghouse, but there are people that are on my street that are still staying in campers and RVs and even tents. It's
So what they've said here, and because this is this is one of the things I'd heard very early on, was that they only provided $750, which is correct initially, but what oftentimes ends up getting overlooked is that nobody really follows up with it, because then the news story moves on and now it's on to the next one. Me and Miss Mandy, I think, talked about this. Not necessarily this fact, but the idea that it's sad to see what's happening in North Carolina because people move on to the next story. Meanwhile, North Carolina is still rebuilding. But the numbers that FEMA has provided is that individuals and household programs have been approved for over $102 million, including $18 million to help homeowners and renters to pay for emergency home repairs, home replacement, or other housing needs. And then $83 million to help with other serious disaster-related needs like moving expenses, childcare, and disaster-related dental, medical, or funeral expenses. And this is the idea that I was trying to get at, which is they've provided funding. There's already funding that is allocated for a lot of these disasters. We saw an issue at that time where FEMA was a little bit tight because of the fact that how massive these disasters were and how little Congress actually allocated to FEMA. But FEMA has provided quite a bit of money to North Carolina. Now, I agree with Miss Mandy, and this is an issue. If it is the fact that they are giving these kinds of hotels and accommodations, maybe it should be stepped up a bit. I would agree with that. But they have provided some kind of funding just based on what I'm seeing so far. So
has not again, Doge figured out that they have given tons of money overseas instead of giving it to where we needed it here at home? If so, that's really, really crappy.
Yeah, so I could talk about well, not USAID, but Doge. But there.
Sorry, I didn't mean to touch on something, Jason. My bad.
No,
if you want to go into this, we can totally go into this. I don't want to like derail either.
Well, I didn't want to get international per se.
Oh no, we're not going to get international.
But I just think that the optic of I'm sure if you are dads in the chat will understand the optic of, hey, I rushed to take care of this issue, but your family is not your immediate family under your roof is not taken care of. I think we could all say that would probably be problematic. And so even if they did pay $750, but then later on came back with more, it just seemed like, I think the optic, everybody could see like that is a problem, that you prioritize other people outside of us than the people that actually pay the taxes that you're funding with, FEMA. So that would be my push, but go ahead.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, and that's the thing, is that there's so many different departments, as we're finding out,
for sure.
The Department of Government Efficiency, and not each one of them operates in a sequential manner where it's like, okay, first priority is this department, then this department. Now, this happens kind of in the budget reconciliation process, but that's not how it operates day to day. They all operate on their own timeline. Here's the timeline. They all operate on their own individual way. And so the same thing that we're seeing here, it's a funding issue. If there is some kind of funding issue that you take up with, like I said, with FEMA or whatever, call your congressman. Say, hey, look, what's going on here? Why is this going on? I would say that you can still do two things at the same time, right? I mean, they're handling these immigration issues, and this, as y'all as Republicans have stated, there have been, a massive wave of migration, and so because of that, it's going to require massive amounts of funding, right? I mean, we're going to have to have, and here's the thing, I think we haven't had an immigration reform in almost like 20, 30 years or something. It's been insane. So, and that's to go back to your earlier point about shutting off the spigot. We have to fix what we have first and then deport them, because here's the thing, he can deport them with the snap of a finger, but it's not going to be as simple to get everything built within the next month. We saw up until his last up until the very end of his administration, he still wasn't able to accomplish from sea to shining sea, the border wall. And
No,
so
that's
yeah.
fair. But like, for example, if we were in a boat,
Mhm.
a boat, and a boat springs a pretty nasty, gnarly leak, but it's fixable, it's solvable. It's just going to take some time. I don't think we would immediately say, "Hey, let's worry about shoveling out the water that's made it up to deck 3." I think most people would say, "Hey, if it's solvable, let's stop the water coming in, cut off the flow of water into the ship, and then get everything out." So if he's saying like we're cutting back on how the border has been moving, how the border has been used, how the border has been operating up to this point, and now we're going to shovel. There might be, maybe we need some of the water. I don't know, but we're going to do something with this water that has flooded the ship. But we got to stop the water from coming in. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to successfully keep this ship afloat. And I believe that's what we're seeing here. And again, nobody is saying, don't hear what I didn't say, that we don't want any immigrants, nobody here at all, just us four and no more. Nobody said that. What we are saying, however, is the influx of people coming in, because if you've ever been on a cruise ship, they got tons of water on a cruise ship, and they like water on a cruise ship, right? The problem is they just don't want the water, flooding over from the pool down into the lower level. So they got to manage the water, and that's all we are saying. So at the end of the day, we want to be able to say, hey, yes, we can take in more people, but we've stopped the leaking, because otherwise the more people flooding in through the bottom is going to bring the whole ship down.
Yeah, I would say that the cork in this situation to stop the flooding would be immigration reform. It would be trying to provide funding and things like that. And then once that immigration reform has been completed and we've got maybe a border wall, border technology, whatever, or the cork has been put into the hole, then we start shoveling the water out, because now we've stopped the water from coming in. Right.
I feel like we're both saying the same thing, but for some reason or another, you like, just say it with me. It's okay. Stop the flow of people coming in. And I'm fine with border reform. I'm fine with immigration reform. I'm fine with other things being taken care of legislatively. But at least, because again, if it's legislatively, we know that it could drag on for an ungodly amount of time. Yeah, but at least during said ungodly amount of time, we're not still flooding decks 4, decks 3, decks 5, and so forth. We've at least stopped the water from coming in. And now we figure out what's the best way to get the water out. Hey, well, we got to pump it. We got to bucket brigade. We got to do whatever, open up windows, whatever. We're going to get the water out of the ship. But I think we all, and I think you want to agree with me, Vince. I know it's okay. It's good. But I feel like you just stop the water from coming in, and then next step, and so forth. Go ahead.
Right. So the issue is that hypothetically, if we could just stop that water from coming in, that'd be great. But the problem is that what we're doing is we're taking a bucket is being the deportation, scooping the water and throwing it out, but we haven't actually fixed the hole, and that hole would be immigration reform. And so
I think the hole is the gate, is the border. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and that's the thing, is that the problem is that you and I would have to agree that the only thing they're doing right now with the border, right now at least, I think I don't know if they've resumed construction on the wall, but as far as I've understood, they've only put barriers up and some barbed wire fencing. But even then, you'd have to say it's certainly not in what, a month you're going to tell me they've got done from sea to shining sea? There's still going to be holes in the ship, right? And that's why I'm saying that the more appropriate analogy would feel as if you're taking that bucket, throwing it out, and that water is just going to come right back in. And that's kind of my issue that I'm having is that we haven't even stopped the hole. If you want to use the hole as being the analogy of them coming in, that's fine. But even then, what I feel like is, if you want to say that the cork is the border wall, the immigration reform, whatever, maybe it's about this big, but the hole is about this big. So all you're doing is you're going to put that cork there, and that water is going to go right back out. And so that's my issue that I have, is I would agree with you if we had a border that was completely on lockdown with towers everywhere.
Well, even something as simple as the military. I mean, if we say, hey, while we're building a wall, because again, building a wall is not going to be done tonight. If Trump had all the money and all the resources, it would still take, an amount of time. So nobody's saying, snap our fingers, we got a wall. But even if we stymie it, like putting the military on National Guard there and such of that nature, which we've seen, because we've seen a reduction in the amount of people coming in. And all we're saying is stop the people coming in while we deal with the flooding of the deck, while we deal with getting whatever reforms we need to have in play so that people can go through the proper steps to get into the country and allow everybody to do well. Because again, and somebody said something about the great American melting pot. Nobody's saying that we're not. Again, don't hear what I didn't say. I think that's one of the things. Again, I'm not saying we don't want people to come into this country. Nobody said that. And I feel like I can speak for you as well, Vince. Is that fair?
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think there are certainly people that are on the right that like, hey, we don't want any immigration, but I'll agree that they are the far and few between. And I want to mention this to the person who asked the question about the military or made the statement. The issue is that the U.S. military cannot enforce immigration policy without essentially, I think the one way that Donald Trump has been trying to do it was through the Alien and Enemies Act or whatever it is from like 1798 or something. Mm-hmm. What has happened, however, though, is we have seen military on the border, but what they've been doing is there was a video I've seen where a migrant was walking down the river, and you have 5 military people following that person because they cannot detain that individual. They cannot touch that individual. They cannot do anything to that individual other than just sit there and walk with them. Now, the Texas National Guard has worked and been able to detain them, but only under CBP. They have to be under the supervision of CBP in order to make that arrest. And what this is the 287G program, I believe is what this is in reference to. And 287G allows for local and state law enforcement to be able to enact certain immigration policies. So they're doing what they can, but even then I have an issue with that, because then that opens up a whole can of worms that I'm not very comfortable with, where your local police officer can pull you over, profile you, and say, hey, where's your documentation? And now you're in trouble because you don't have your documentation on you. So there's a lot of concerns that I have about that program. But as far as the U.S. military going down the border, right now, for the time being, until he enacts that 1798 law, I'm just going to say it like it is. It's for show. It's not really providing much other than just sitting there and providing men on the border, and they can't touch the migrants or nothing. They just have to walk with the migrant. So yeah.
And if that be the case, then that is fair. What I am saying though is, in my mind, and feel free to chime in, that is a much more clear demonstration or show that we are serious about the border rather than it's just footloose and fancy free. We don't really care what's going on. We'll just complain. We'll just deal with them when they get to Oklahoma. We'll deal with them when they're in Chicago. When they get to New York, that's when we'll deal with them. Why not, if possible, stymie that and at least allow them the opportunity? Because again, the influx of people coming into New York and other border states, I'm sure areas of Texas as well, has been pretty staggering. And you can't, whether you want open borders or closed, you can't deal with that amount of people, that influx of humans, without some level of problematic situation. So I got you.
Yeah, I feel like that's the thing too, is that like, to understand what happened in New York and happened in Chicago and everything else, is that was due to the fact that we had Texas and Florida, for example, busing in people over to the to New York and Chicago and things like that. Right. So that's going to be an issue there, is that you have those cities, and what they were trying to do is they were trying to use these undocumented immigrants as a political tool to sit there and say, well, you said you're a sanctuary city, take them. And so then when they did that, they're like, hey, we have no place for them. So naturally they had to use, and in the case of New York, they used the Roosevelt Hotel as an immigration hub, essentially. So they would bring them in, process them, find out whether or not they're going to go and stay in New York or if they're going to go to a sponsor. And if they were to stay in New York, they would give them a hotel voucher, but it would only be good for like 30 days. And they'd have to leave and go to, wherever they're going. And that's where a lot of people misunderstand what's going on with the Roosevelt Hotel. Now, I don't know about Chicago specifically. I've gotten into a few conversations about Chicago, but it's not super strong.
Okay, no problem.
But yeah, I think the deportation thing is really interesting. I think that what we're seeing with people going to Gitmo, the ACLU has brought up particular lawsuits because of the fact that they're in Gitmo and not being able to communicate with any of their lawyers. And so because of that, the ACLU is saying, look, they are still entitled to be able to talk to their attorneys until they're even when they were back in their homeland. This actually was a big issue with Remain in Mexico. I'll land my plane here. When they were in Mexico, there was an issue with them being able to communicate with their attorneys just because of the fact of the conditions that they were in Mexico and everything else. And I think they even had some people that went to Mexico that weren't even citizens of Mexico. They were just thrown over there because of the Remain in Mexico policy. So it's important to understand that these people still do have constitutional rights, whether they are an undocumented immigrant or not. Once they touch U.S. soil, they're here. And my issue has been with the enforcement. The enforcement Tom Holman is doing is pretty wild. Basically, if he comes into the home and he sees a criminal undocumented immigrant, he's going to sweep up anybody in that house that is an undocumented immigrant.
Right.
So it's crazy. I don't know. I think there's a way to do it. I just think the way that they're being done right now is putting the cart before the horse, basically, to sum it up.
I can dig that. I feel like we are, as we get ready to round these bases, I feel like we are agree that there should be some border in place. Shouldn't just be an open border, flow in and out. However, I think the triage, if you will, if we put them in order of importance, I feel like we might be missing one another, because I feel like securing the border to some degree, shape, or form, stymieing people coming in unvetted, and then allow us opportunity to vet and such like that, and get rid of people who are not supposed to be here and undesirables and such like that are not adding to the economy and such like that, rather than take care of the undesirables from other countries and we can't even take care of our own people here. To me, that is super problematic. I think we came to a meeting of the minds as relates to DEI. I do believe that we understood one another. I think it's good for everybody to have an opportunity to hear somebody who disagrees with me, which I have no problem with that. I love pushback. An opportunity to hear a different perspective on that. And of course, second to last, we talked about reparations. And I do again think that I appreciate your insight. I appreciate what you had to say on the matter. I do again still stand where I am, but I do think it's good for people to have those good conversations, which is ultimately what I like doing here, is having good conversation. We don't have to agree on everything. If I met you in public, don't worry about it. I'm not going to fight you. We can go get some, wings or something like that if you ever come to Atlanta.
Absolutely, man.
What part of Texas?
I am from the great state of Houston.
Oh my gosh. Oh, my brother's in Dallas. My brother's in Dallas. So I was like, oh man, if you're in Dallas, then we can make this thing happen.
I visit Dallas every now and then. I do enjoy it, but I've grown up in Texas my entire life, and so I've been to almost every city, and Dallas has a unique vibe to it. I kind of like it. I like the Metroplex a little bit.
Right.
So
it's pretty nice. But no, man, I really appreciate you stopping through, and you're definitely a friend of the channel. Even if we don't agree on everything, it is perfectly fine. So I'm going to ask the best live chat on the planet to flood the chat with a dog emoji. I got to find me a dog emoji in this chat. We're going to flood it with dogs. Just let you know, man, we appreciate you, man. Again, if I can get the moderators to drop your link in the chat as well, just make sure that we check out what you're doing over there. And if you do go by there, make sure you drop that little green heart. Let them know we appreciate them. And you came from the best live chat on the internet. Anything, you got any projects you're working on give you an opportunity?
Well, Doghouse Show is something I've been using for the past 6 years. I'm working on a little bit of rebranding, but when that time comes, everyone will see it. But no major projects. I'm working on trying to get more out in the field. I want to cover more protests and things like that. I said when Trump took office, it was the greatest gift to political content creators out there.
I told you.
I may not like some of his policies, but he's got a lot of controversy surrounding him. So it's a content creator's dream. So yeah, I'm just continuously trying to improve and see how we can. I'm working on trying to get to 1,000 subscribers so I can finally reach that goal. But right now we're halfway there, almost halfway there. We're at 500 subscribers. So we'll get there soon.
I love it. Well, man, I'm gonna drop you back. Don't go anywhere. We'll definitely follow back up. 1 second. I want to say thank y'all to everybody who's tapped in with us. Thank y'all so much. That was a lot of fun. I appreciate y'all spamming the dog in the chat. Let him know we appreciate him. He's definitely welcome. Doghouse Show is always welcome to come by and stir up the pot, stir up the conversation. I appreciate all the fantastic comments, all the good back and forth. If I missed any, please forgive me. Charge it to my heart, charge it to my head, not to my heart. You know how it goes. I really appreciate y'all so much. Thank you again, everybody. We're going to do this again real soon. Tomorrow is Tuesday, and I think there's something going on in Dalton tomorrow. So we will work on that. And I'm trying to catch up with Lady Luck Club on Wednesday. So I'll make sure you all know about that well ahead of time so you can plan accordingly, because we'll probably do a live stream at a wing place somewhere here in Atlanta. So that's going to be fun. But everybody, again, I want to say thank you so much for tapping in. Thank you so much. If you didn't hit the like button, hit the like button on the way out. And until next time, everybody, grace and peace. See you soon.